Okay, good evening, everybody. This is episode 66 of Tech Thursdays. We're going to be looking at some of the articles from WCCF Tech. Thanks to WCCF Tech for always having some interesting articles. Even if the info turns out to be misleading or factually incorrect or not fully correct or partially correct, I do like to look at some of these articles because they do kind of clue us in on some aspects of certain hardware launches. In this case, we're going to be talking about Zen 5 again, particularly the motherboards. Now, this article from WCCF Tech, is it the only article of its kind? I don't see any other article from Tech Power. I usually check those two, and then I'll look at some of the other sources. But looking at this, and we'll look at video cards as well. Oh, here's an interesting one. AMD explains why Ryzen 9000. Okay, so we'll go over some of this. This live stream might be short because I know that there is this episode is a little different. So I don't know how many people are going to be watching. It might be a very short show. We have Dawn Trail Early Access tomorrow. I did finish Shadow of the Erdtree. All the bosses are dead now, including the final boss. The only thing I need to do is touch the memory and watch the final cutscene. Hey, Cam. Yeah, so we're gonna draw some block diagrams for X870E and X870 for anybody that's thinking of upgrading. But this article from WCCF Tech, I want to go over this one first because it pertains to the motherboards that are supposed to launch in support of Zen 5 CPUs, which are the Ryzen 9000 series. And this is a very weird article because all the rumors point to Zen 5, and a lot of this was from people that actually attended Computex earlier this month. They said the word on the street was that Zen 5 Ryzen 9000 would be launching around the end of July. But now there's this article saying that the X870E and the X870 AM5 motherboards are to launch on September 30th. When I first saw this, I was like, okay, this sounds like fake news, because if the CPUs are coming out at the end of July, why would you launch the corresponding motherboards 2 months later? Historically, with CPU launches, the motherboards launch either on the same day that the CPUs launch, or they actually historically have launched prior, meaning before the CPUs are available. So this doesn't make any sense. I don't know why. If this is true, I want to say something really quick. If this is true, if this story about the X870E and the X870 motherboards launching on September 30th, if this is in fact true, then the AM5 launch will not be good. It will not be good. And there's a lot of reasons for that. And we're going to go through that. So basically, what this article means to say is that either the whole platform is launching at the end of September, which means the CPUs are actually not launching in July, based off or contrary to what we were led to believe from Computex. Because why would you launch CPUs without the motherboards? Who's going to buy the CPU? So now, obviously, there's going to be people that are like, well, you can just buy X870E or B650. You can basically buy the last generation motherboards, and you can put these CPUs in there. Yeah, true, you can do that. You can do that. But there are some caveats there, which are only going to hurt the overall launch. And we're going to list them right now. So, So there's only two outcomes. This is very simple. There are only two outcomes. There is condition A. We're gonna do this like in programming. It's like as a programmer. Condition A is Ryzen 9000 and X870E / X870 launch together. Condition A is basically the motherboards that are meant for these CPUs launch at the same time as the CPUs. They launch together. That is condition A. Condition B is Ryzen 9000 launches first, X870E, X870 launch second, meaning separate launch. Okay, this is condition B. So this is what this article from WCCF Tech is detailing, basically. So you have that, and you have the condition A. There's two outcomes. Outcome A. The Zen 5 launch is a success. That's this happens if this happens. Now, if the motherboards launch separately. Oh, we don't have enough viewers yet. I was going to ask the chat. Actually, we'll ask the chat. For the 5 people that are watching this, what do you guys think will be the outcome if the CPUs launch by themselves and then the motherboards launch like 2 months later? Or like a month and a half to 2 months later? Hey, it's Beatles. 6 people, yeah. So what do you think happens if the motherboards launch separately from the CPUs? Meaning, if you were somebody who wanted to get a Zen 5 CPU, what do you think the outcome is? Hey, Marcelo. So now we have 7 people. Because I think this is the ideal. This is what should happen. This is what historically is supposed to happen. But somehow, less sales by a bit. Less sale? Okay, yeah, there'll be less sales. Initially, there'll be less sales. I think overall that won't really factor in. But I think what will end up happening... So, okay, we can put that in, but outcome B. Less initial sales. So less initial sales, because it's like... the CPUs become available, but no one buys them, or less people buy them at launch because they don't want to pair them up with the older motherboards. So, see, think about it like this. That would be like if I was buying a 14900K and I couldn't buy a Z790 motherboard at launch because they would be delayed by 2 months, then I'd have to buy a Z690. And we all know Z690 is not that good at memory overclocking compared to Z790. See, this is the reason why, from a practicality standpoint, if I was buying into a brand new CPU platform, I would prefer to buy the generation of motherboard that is meant to go with that CPU. I don't want to take an older generation motherboard, so like a motherboard that's meant for a Ryzen 7000 series, and pair that up with a Ryzen 9000 CPU. Now, you could do it. It'll work fine. I'm not saying it's not going to work, but it's not the ideal. It's not the ideal outcome for someone who is buying a brand new or building a brand new computer. You know what I'm saying? People will wait until September, maybe a way for AMD to push the sales of current stock of 7,000 chips. Yeah, and that's why there'll be less initial sales. And memory overclocking isn't great on X670. Yeah, exactly. This is the reason why if the motherboards don't come out with the CPUs simultaneously, this launch will be, to put it bluntly, underwhelming. Almost on the side of underwhelmingly forgettable. So, like, meaning if AMD wants to make a big splash, because this is their window of opportunity, these opportunities don't come up very often. Because here, right now, there's a moment in time where there is a delay from Intel's part, where AMD has this runway just opened up, available to them to take advantage of it. Come on, get your CPUs out there while you can. Be the first mover. But if condition B happens, oh no, September 30th, do you guys know what that means? That means that Ryzen 9000 will be heavily compared to Intel's upcoming 15th generation. See what I mean? So the longer AMD waits, or if they botch this launch by spreading the motherboard way out there, where technically by the time, if the motherboards truly come out on September 30th, that means they're going to launch so close to Intel's Arrow Lake desktop processors that those who would have probably purchased Ryzen 9000 and not even thought of waiting for Intel, now they're going to be on the fence waiting around to see what Intel does. See, this is why a lot of people who are very critical of AMD, they always point out how AMD manages to botch almost every single opportunity that they're given. Like, they somehow manage to screw it up in a way that their competitors don't really do. Like, you know what I'm saying? I guess the only really bad screw up from Intel was the Alchemist, the A7, the GPU launch from Intel was pretty terrible, to be honest. But other than that, I think Intel's done pretty good, even though some of their launches historically have been very underwhelming and boring, like case in point 14th generation. And there were a lot of other ones before that, like Kaby Lake, the 7th gen, and all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, AMD could have a really good launch in the summer, or they could have a very underwhelmingly bland launch that just fizzles out and gets washed away in the noise. And by the time the platform is actually readily available in the market, there's going to be people looking at Intel again. You see what I'm saying? So that is kind of sad in a way. The RAM from X670E will work on it. Yes, it will. I just want a board like X670E but with like 4 lanes. With like 4 lanes? What do you mean 4 lanes? You mean like an X4? We're going to talk about the chipset here in a little bit. We're going to do a lot of block diagram. But so less initial sales. People will wait until X870E, X870. The motherboards launch closer to Arrow Lake than Zen 5. This is what's stupid. This is probably the dumbest thing. If this turns out to be true, because I don't believe the article from WCCF Tech. In fact, I want to go back and look at that article real quick. Because where are they getting this? Who told them this? At Computex, AMD announced blah, 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 blah. We already know that. Besides USB 4, da, 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 da. Okay, July, we already know. Certain aspects, da, 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 da. Okay, according to our sources, X870E, X870 motherboards will hit retail on the 30th of September. Which is 2 months. Okay, this is a complete fail, man. This is such a fail. Like, seriously, this is the stupidest thing I've read all day. Like, if this is in fact real, then AMD just shot themselves in both feet. Because they were so far ahead of Intel, and they had a really good window of opportunity here to basically do a Ryzen 5000 like launch again. But I don't know, man. If you can't buy the motherboard, why are you going to buy the CPU? And for those of you that are saying, we're just going to wait until X3D, yeah, you can wait till X3D. That's fine. We have no idea when X3D is coming out, though. So now, this other part of the article does say that it is stated that the launch will be fairly close to the release of next-gen Ryzen X3D, which are also expected to launch this year, though we don't know the exact launch. See, nobody knows when X3D is coming out. All we know is Zen 5 is Q3, and Intel Arrow Lake, aka 15th gen, is Q4. Those are the only definite things that we know. We don't know anything in regards to X3D. No one from AMD has given any time frame that's definitive. All they have said is that X3D on 9000 does exist and it will come to the market. But they did not say when. They never hinted at when it would come out. So we don't know if it's 4 months down the line, 6 months down the line, you know, Q1 next year, Q2 next year. Nobody actually knows. So all I'm saying is that the closer or the longer AMD waits and the closer they put their CPU next to Intel's launch, because you guys know Intel has a real marketing division, unlike AMD. So Intel can get the word out and build up more than one hype train. They can build up multiple hype trains around 15th gen, Intel Core Ultra. I can see it now. I can see it now. When Intel has their next innovation day in Q4, Pat Gelsinger, all those guys, they're going to be announcing Arrow Lake. They're going to be announcing LGA 1851, new chipset. It's so much better. Get rid of your trashy 14 and 13th gen. Those things are unstable and they're probably physically damaged. And you know what you can do to fix the problem for those of you with crashing issues? Pat Gelsinger will tell you, Intel will tell you, buy Intel Core Ultra. It will fix all the problems you have with 14th gen. All you have to do is buy a new motherboard and a new CPU. Yeah, that'll fix the problem. Throw money at the problem. Buy Intel. That's what it's going to be a huge hype train. I'm telling you right now, it's going to be a huge, huge hype train in Q4. So if this stupid X870E is going to put itself right up there alongside Arrow Lake, that's only going to hurt AMD in the long run. So it's very dumb. It's very dumb. If this is true, AMD, like I said, AMD shot themselves in their feet. For real. Like, literally for real. And this is very disappointing. Very disappointing. If this is in fact true. I hope this is fake news. Because I don't understand. I've never heard of a company launching CPUs with no motherboards for the CPU. Like, that's the stupidest launch. And anyone who's saying, oh, you can just put X670, we already covered that. Why would you buy an older motherboard to put with a newer CPU and handicap your memory overclocking capability? Why would you do that? See, no one's really going to want to do that. It's the lesser ideal. It is a worse user experience, and it is not a good feeling when the only option is buy it last gen motherboard to pair up with next gen CPU. That sounds very dumb, quite frankly. That is stupid. So anyway, but that doesn't mean people aren't going to do it. Like, honestly, the only people, if the motherboards are not available on day one with the CPU, the only people that are going to buy Zen 5 in the summer are people that already have Zen 4. People who are going to do a drop-in socket upgrade. They're the only prime candidates. Not anyone who's on 5800X3D, for example. Or anyone who's on a 3800X. Or a Zen 1. Or an ancient FX850. Or even an older Intel CPU. Because believe it or not, there's even more people out there on Skylake and Coffee Lake and Comet Lake than there are on like Ryzen 2, for example. Like Zen 2. So that's just straight up fail. Oh, and here's the other thing too that I wanted to point out. And this is also an outcome of option or condition B. People will have to update the BIOS of X670, B650. Basically, anyone who, if somebody buys a older motherboard on launch day, most likely the motherboard will be with an old BIOS that doesn't recognize the Zen 5 CPU. So the average gamer updating their PC or building a new PC, do you think that the average person's gonna know that they need to update their BIOS on an older motherboard? Unless the store is literally opening up brand new packaging and like doing it in the store for customers, which guaranteed no one's really doing that. Like Newegg's not doing that. Amazon's definitely not doing that. So this is the sort of thing that's going to create, you know what this is going to create? This is what I call a red flag. This has the potential, this is what I call a risk factor. This is the sort of thing that causes potential damage to the reputation of AMD. Because if someone bricks their BIOS, for example, on their brand new X670 that they bought from Micro Center or online, and because they don't know how to update their BIOS, they try to do BIOS flashback, they don't wait long enough, they pull out the thumb drive. You know what I mean? I can see this failing so much for people who don't know how to update BIOS. I can see this going horribly wrong, and that has the potential to damage the reputation and increase the return rate on CPUs and motherboards, and potentially RMAs are going to go up. So this is a headache for companies like Asus and MSI and Gigabyte and the vendors like Newegg and Amazon and Micro Center. So not a very good scenario. So again, this is the reason why this is the way it's supposed to be. You should have motherboards that are designed for your CPUs launching together at the same time, just like how it's supposed to be done. So anyway, I hope that this is true and that article is just straight up fake news. Because if that's real, if those motherboards aren't coming out until September, very few people are going to buy Zen 5. At that point, everyone's just going to wait for X3D, or at the very least, they're going to wait for Intel's 15th gen. And that has the potential to just basically continue to place AMD in this perpetual second-class citizen position in terms of market share. Like you can have a better product, but if you botch your launch, like it doesn't even matter if your product's better, right? Like if someone can't upgrade conveniently, and if they have to go through all these hoops and hurdles, or settle for less with older motherboards, you know what I'm saying? Like that's not a good feeling. That's not a good customer experience. So hopefully AMD does it correctly, and X870E and X870 launch together with the Ryzen 9000. Otherwise, it's going to be a fail. What could have been a Ryzen 5000 launch, it'll turn into a... I don't even know what type of launch it'll be. Like, when was the last time a CPU launched without the motherboards? It'll be kind of like Zen 1. Although Zen 1, you could buy motherboards on launch day, except there were very few and far between. So what could have been a Zen 3 launch is going to probably end up being like a Zen 1 launch. So I don't know, man. Like, that's a very stupid story, but I hope it's not true. Anyway, let's move on now. Handicap memory over... Yeah, you're handicapping your memory overclocking potential if you go with an older motherboard. Because the newer motherboards have better microcode, and they probably have better physical tracing in terms of the board design. The lessons learned from first generation DDR5 memory controllers will be applied to the newer motherboards. That's the reason why I definitely recommend X870 versus X670 if you're going to go with Ryzen 9000. And this also applies to the X3D variants. So that being said, I will get one of those Ryzen CPUs on launch, and I'll probably put it in my X670E Aorus Master. So now let's talk about the chipset. Was there something in here? Okay. So this article, conveniently, it shows this. It shows which CPU, 9700X. I haven't decided yet. Maybe. I'm leaning more toward the 9700X, but I don't know yet. I think that'll be the most cost-effective option, and it's also the most energy efficient. So, but we'll see. Let's see. What did I want to say on this? We've already talked about the chipset. So the main thing is with X870E. First, let's do X870. We're going to do X870 first. Now, it's going to be very disappointing if you have to wait until the end of September to buy this. For those of you that are still on an older CPU platform, because I would not recommend buying X670 at this point, because it's literally almost 2 years old. It'll be 2 years old. What's funny is by the time the X870 comes out, if it really does come out at the end of September, X670 is 2 years old at that point, because X670 was September 2022. So do you really want to build a new CPU and buy a new pay like new motherboard pricing for a 2-year-old, what's effectively a 2-year-old motherboard? You see what I'm saying? Like, that's kind of lame. But anyway, so X870. This is a single chipset. It's a single. So how should we, you know what, hold on. So we have AM5, we have the socket, and then we have the chipset. So you have your CPU, and you have your chipset. And remember, it's single socket, so it's single chip. It's not dual. It's only one. The AM5 has CPU lanes that are wired to the PCIe, and then you have PCIe here, then you have an interconnect here, and then you have PCIe Gen 3 here, and you have a bunch of USB. Now, one thing that they are mandating is USB 4. So USB 4 is required, and we have to look at the budget for the lanes. USB 4 requires 4 lanes of PCIe 3.0 or 4.0. But what I have heard is that the newer, so the As Media controller, which is basically going to be soldered onto these motherboards, they're saying that it requires, or it makes use of PCIe 4.0. Now, I don't know if they have to use 4.0, but most likely they will use the 4.0. So, we have to know our lane counts, both CPU and chipset, to understand what is available. So, the CPU has PCIe 5.0 x 24 lanes. The total lane count is actually 28 lanes. But 4 of those lanes, we're just going to do, we're going to put the aggregate total here. Well, actually, I don't want to confuse you guys, so I'm going to give you usable. This is usable lanes, not total lanes. Usable lanes, not total. Why? Because there's actually 4 lanes. 4 of these PCIe 5, 4 of the 28. So you basically take 28, pull out 4, so you're left with 24, because you're putting the 4 lanes here. Because you need to take 4 of those lanes to connect to the chipset, so that the CPU could talk to the chipset and everything that it connects to. So that's why I say 24 usable, 28 total. Because if I count all of these and these, 24 plus 4 is 28. That's where the total 28 lane PCI Gen 5 comes from. So every X870 motherboard will have 24 usable PCI Gen 5 lanes. And I want to make that distinction. Every good X870 motherboard will use all of those lanes in some capacity. Lower end motherboards might not solder things, so they might, you know, like they might not give you many PCIe. They might give you less NVMe storage, for example. So, but the good X870 boards should make use of all 24 of those lanes in some form or fashion. 16 of these will go to the GPU. So we have 16 here. That is the GPU slot. So that's 16 lanes. So now 24 minus 16, we have what? 8 left. So what do you do with the remaining 8? 4 and 4. So you can do M.2 Gen 5, M.2 Gen 5, or PCI 5.0 X4 slot. So there's a lot of different things you can wire there. USB 4 could go there too, but that's not a good use of the USB 4. Well, that's not a good use of Gen 5 for USB 4. Now you have the chipset. The chipset has PCIe 4.0 X8 and PCIe 3.0 X4. So you have 4 lanes of PCI 3.0 and you have 8 lanes of PCI 4.0 off of the chipset X870. So the total lane count for Gen 4 on the chipset would be 12 lanes, because I have 8 and then I have 4 more that I have to physically wire to the CPU. So the total lane count for Gen 4 would be 12 lanes. So what can we do with this? As you can imagine, we can do 4 lanes here and another 4 lanes here. Or you can break it out and do other things. You could put like Wi-Fi or 10 gigabit LAN, for example. You could take 2 lanes to do that, but you'll really only need that on the Gen 3. So what I expect to see, there's going to be a lot of motherboards that use the ASM or the as media splitters. So you're going to have, so basically with the 3.0, we're going to have Wi-Fi. So you're going to have what, 2.5 or 5 gig. And then you have Wi-Fi 7 on 1 lane. These only take up like 1 lane of Gen 3. So this is X1. This is X1. Now, if you're gonna do if you're gonna buy a motherboard that has 10 gigabit LAN, that will take 2 lanes of PCI Gen 3 to pull that off. So I don't expect to see any X870 motherboard offer 10 gigabit networking, at least not natively. If you want 10 gigabit networking, you're going to be looking for X870E. X870E will have 10 gigabit networking because it will have more lanes available. And we'll show that in a little bit. So, but these are the people. I have a feeling X870 is going to be the one that a lot of people focus on. Actually, we'll just put Prom 21. That's Prom 21 is the chip. All right, and then we still have 2 more. So 1 and 2. And what these will do is most likely they're going to wire these to splitters. These are going to be as media splitters. And what you'll see is you're going to get 2 SATA or SATA per splitter. So you have a total of 4 SATA ports, or SATA 3.0 ports. So you're going to get 4 SATA via splitters. So that means no RAID support. No RAID support. I would not expect to see RAID support on these motherboards. Otherwise, if an X870 is going to offer RAID, like RAID 0, RAID 1, RAID 10 or 5, etc., like if it's going to do that, it's not going to have a lot of NVMe. So the way this is set up right now, you can get up to 4 NVMe, meaning 1, 2, 3, 4 SSD or M.2 SSDs, and then 4 legacy SATA off of splitters. I think this is going to be a very common setup. Now, what people will probably do, what motherboard manufacturers will probably do, they'll put a switch. They'll put a switch here. And what they'll do is they're going to wire off the splitter. They're going to give you an option. They'll give you an X4 PCIe 4.0, or I guess PCIe 4.0 X4 slot. They'll give you an open slot for like a capture card, for example, or a 10 gigabit NIC, or M.2. PCIe 4.0 M.2. So they could do that too. But here's the thing. This port, this one right here, this X4 is going to be wired to something called ASM 4242. ASM 4242. Let me make sure that I'm telling you guys the right model number. I always get it mixed up. It's either ASM 4242 or ASM 2424. ASM 4242. Yes, I was correct. It's the ASM 4242. This is it. This is the thing that all these new X870E and X870 motherboards will include. I believe this is what they'll include, because X670E was supposed to include this 2 years ago, but there was a delay. As media had some sort of delay with the manufacturing, because keep in mind this was the coattails of the coming off of the pandemic and the supply shortages. So who knows what the delay reason was. But anyway, there was a delay. So what ended up happening was they went with JHL8540. This. Intel's Maple Ridge JHL 8540 Thunderbolt 4 controller. This is the USB 4 controller in X670E, X670, and B650E. If any of those motherboards, well, okay, forget about X670 because that one doesn't have any as far as I know. X670E, for example, Asus's Crosshair Hero, the X670E Crosshair Hero, and the Crosshair Extreme both feature this Intel Thunderbolt 4 controller in their AMD motherboards. Also, ASRock X670E Tai Chi and ASRock X or B650E Tai Chi include this Thunderbolt 4 controller on the motherboard natively, which means there are some X670E and B650E motherboards that are meant for Zen 4 that already have USB 4 in them via Intel's Thunderbolt 4 controller. I have many, many videos on my channel showcasing this. We've talked about Intel's Thunderbolt 4 extensively. There's a lot of videos. You can even buy the external Thunderbolt 4 PCIe cards and plug them in to the AMD motherboards. As long as it has the header, it will work. We've gone through block diagrams. We've proven this out. It's in the documentation. So anyway, the shift away from Intel-based Thunderbolt 4 controller for USB 4 is basically because of the ASMedia 4242. So because of the ASMedia 4242 or ASM 4242, now ASMedia's first generation Universal Serial Bus 4, aka USB 4, host controller, upstream ports, blah, 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 blah. Now, the nice thing about this, Intel's was PCI, this thing was spec'd for PCI Gen 3 4 lanes. So this runs off of a Gen 3 4 lanes. This newer one, I believe, is Gen 4 4 lanes. So in theory, yeah, right here, PCIe Gen 4. And it has dual 4-lane DisplayPort sync ports. So basically that means that you can do DisplayPort out from the USB-C or the USB 4 port off the motherboard. If they were to, for example, solder the integrated graphics on the Ryzen CPU to one of these USB 4 ports, you could drive an external monitor for your integrated graphics off of a USB 4 port via DisplayPort alt mode. So that is what will be featured in X870E and X870. Now, because they are saying that it's mandatory, that means you're going to need, or the motherboard manufacturer must devote 4 of these 8 lanes to that ASM 4242. And that is the reason why every single one of these will have dual USB 4. So you get 2 ports of USB 4. Better use a dedicated RAID controller over setting up your board to do RAID. Yeah, no one really... Yeah, I mean, the thing is, no one really does RAID anymore, right? On consumer desktop. Because NVMEs are so fast now. Yeah, hardware RAID is pretty much dead in this day and age. So that's the reason why they're doing that. They're using these ASMedia. Again, it's ASMedia splitters right here. I forget the model number, but they've got some ASMedia splitters. That's how they're getting 4 SATA ports. Now, yeah, because the idea is that they would run 2.5 or 3.5 inch hard drives. Now we know hard drives do not saturate a single PCIe 3.0 lane in terms of bandwidth, so that's the reason why you can basically put a splitter on there and share the bandwidth of one PCIe 3.0 lane for 2 hard drives. Now you could also run 2.5 inch SSDs, but you know most SSDs now are definitely M.2. So stuff like this is one example of what an X870 motherboard would look like. But the thing that I'm noticing, so this would be, let's just fill this out. This would be the GPU. This would be M.2, Gen 5, M.2, Gen 5. And the splitter is optional. Like, they might just give you, 1, 2, 3 M.2 natively. Or, alternatively, what I could also see some of these boards doing is a splitter here. They could put a splitter here where the X4 or they would do, GPU gets full 16, but as soon as you plug in like something into an X8, the second PCIe slot could be an X8, so it cuts the bandwidth in half. So they could do stuff like that. They could even put an NVMe drive off of this. So you could have, you know, X16 slot, you could have an X8 slot sharing it, and then you could have an NVMe. So they could do stuff like that to get to basically to give the user 1, 2, 3, 4 NVMe drives. They would have to compromise on the GPU lanes, just like the Intel Z790 boards, in order to pull that off. Like, they would literally just have to do that because the X870 just doesn't have enough lanes to prevent sharing of resources like this. Now, I know a lot of people that watch my channel, they don't like the idea of sharing resources like this, but that's what happens when you go with a consumer desktop platform. Unfortunately, to keep costs low, they just don't have enough lanes. So you have to, the motherboard manufacturers have to come up with some tricky, clever ways of giving you more with, you know, a finite set of lanes. And the only way they can pull that off is by using splitters, PLX switches, and that kind of thing. In a way, the mandatory USB 4 is kind of what is going to make a lot of... See, I'm assuming here that a lot of X870 boards will probably only have either 3 M.2 drives, unless they have a lot of lane sharing with the GPU slot, like with what Intel did on Z790. So they could make it very similar to Z790 by using splitters and PLX switches. Otherwise, if somebody wants the no compromise experience in terms of lanes and the total usage of the platform, they're going to have to go with X870E. So it's basically no different from the way X670E is from B650E today. So that's food for thought for those of you that are thinking of upgrading to Zen 5, and you're definitely going to be wanting to pair it up with a newer motherboard. These are things to be aware of. So in general, what I would say, if you are using your PC for, you know, like, I hesitate to use the word workstation, because if someone really wanted a workstation, I would not recommend this. I would recommend Threadripper, because that is a no compromise platform which has none of this. There's like none of this or this or even this. Like, Threadripper is native lanes for days everywhere. So it's an abundance of bandwidth and PCIe connectivity. So it's not going to be anything like this. But if you're using your PC for, or I guess, let's say, if you are a power user, meaning you're somebody who will actually connect a bunch of NVMe, a bunch of hard drives, maybe even more than one graphics card. Well, if you're thinking of multiple GPU, that in this day and age, if you're going multi-GPU, you're probably going to be going Threadripper, to be honest. In all honesty, dual GPU on AM5 or even Intel stuff today is kind of a joke, because they just don't have that many lanes. But anyway, if you're a power user and you're going to have a lot of like NVMe, hard drives, SSDs, capture card, maybe you're actually going to use USB 4 with your old Thunderbolt 3 devices, for example. If you're that kind of person, that type of user, then X870E is the way to go, not X870. If you are a gamer and you only play games, meaning you don't really use your PC for much more than just playing games, And I know that sounds very generic, but let's be honest, like if you mainly use your PC to play games, then X870 is fine. But for a true power user, like someone like me, X870 is not enough. Like X870 is totally not giving me enough lanes. Like I need more lanes. Because well, first of all, I'm going to need like a ton of USB ports, but that's not really the problem here. The problem is not going to be lack of USB. The problem is going to be lack of internal connectivity. Lack of like NVMe total count, without sacrificing on other things like GPU lanes, for example. So that's the reason why X870 is like, yeah, it's good for like the average user or like a gamer or something, or someone who cares about RGB and all that stuff. Like, yeah, X870, that'll get the job done. But if you truly use your computer for like heavy lifting of like workloads and stuff, X870E. 100% X870E. There's a reason why it's going to cost more money. Thoughts on the one ASRock board, which has USB-C for back I/O? Don't all of them have USB-C? Oh, you mean the one that has all USB-C? Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah, I think it's dumb. I mean, in the future, it makes sense. But today, it doesn't make sense. You know why? I'll tell you why. Where am I going to plug this in? How am I going to plug my MMO mouse? How am I going to plug my Logitech MMO mouse for Final Fantasy? This is a wired USB-A mouse. How am I going to plug in my... well, you guys can't see it. I can't lift it up. It's too heavy. The Corsair keyboard. How am I gonna plug in my Corsair keyboard with the Corsair hub that takes 2 USB Type A? This Xbox Series X controller. How am I gonna plug this in to that ASRock motherboard? You know what I'm saying? So I think it's too far. It's too forward thinking. Maybe in another 3 years, we'll circle back with ASRock on that. But for today, no. I gotta have USB-A. I gotta have way more USB-A than USB-C because so many peripherals. Yeah, it can use USB-C. I mean, this end is USB-C, but this cable came in the box with the controller. Guess what's on the other end? USB-A. It's USB-A on the other end of the cable. Same thing with the ones for the DualSense. The Sony one, PS5, USB-C here, but guess what? On the other end, USB-A. So too many things are still using USB-A. You can get a USB-A hub. Yeah, the problem with the hub is that depending on the hub's quality, that can cause problems with S3 Sleep not working correctly. Because I've tested USB hubs in the past, and what'll commonly happen is if I make the computer go to sleep, or the computer will try to go to sleep, something about the hub requiring some amount of standby power will trigger the PC to turn back on immediately. So it's like I put the computer to sleep, it goes to sleep, and then literally as soon as it goes to sleep, it immediately wakes up and comes out of sleep. So it can't go to sleep because of the USB hub. So I am not a fan of USB hubs. Windows, maybe Linux is a lot better in that regard, but Windows does not work well with USB hubs. If you put your computer to sleep, if you put your computer in hibernate or you turn it off, like you shut down, then it's fine. But if you're someone like me who I never shut my computer down, I never hibernate my computer, I always use S3 system standby, aka sleep. And what I have found is if a hub is connected, it depends on the motherboard, it depends on a lot of things, but oftentimes sleep won't work. It'll go to sleep and it'll wake up immediately. So, yeah, I don't like USB hubs. I don't use any USB hubs for that reason. But yeah, I'm not a big fan of that ASRock board. In the future, it'll make a lot more sense though. But today, no. There's too many peripherals that use USB-A. I'll give you guys another example. Here's another example. This is a Blu-ray. This is an external Blu-ray. It doesn't open because it's turned off. So check this out. You know what I use this for? This is for PS3 emulation. PS3 emulation. So I use RPC, the PS3 emulator. I have my PS3 collection, all my Blu-ray official games that I purchased for my PS3 years ago. If I want to play those on the PC using the emulator, I've got a Blu-ray drive that will dump the disc so I can use with RPC. Guess what? See this? That's not USB-C. That's the old, this is like the PS4 or Xbox One USB. I forget what it's called. Mini USB or micro USB. That one. You guys see that? Look at the other end of it. It requires two USB-A. Two USB-A. One for power, one for the data. I need to have both these plugged in. So, see, this is the reason why I'm telling you. The point I'm making is USB-A, if you're a power user, you're still using a lot of USB-A peripherals. Just saying. Blu-ray drive, game controller, keyboard, mouse. That doesn't even get to like the microphone I'm using is USB with a USB-A connection. The like the old VR headset that I don't actually have here right now, but the Oculus Rift, that I have, that thing's USB-A. You know, all the sensors are USB-A. So I need a ton of USB-A. Like, the only thing I have that's USB-C, it would be like my Thunderbolt 3 external 4K capture card. And that's not even USB-C. That's Thunderbolt 3. So I would need a USB 4 port off of one of these new motherboards if I wanted to connect that. So, because USB-C would not work. Standard USB-C would not work with that. Okay, but anyway, that is X870. So X870E, the only difference is now let's add X870. Or no, let's make this an X870E. So to do that, let's clean this up a little bit. Let's remove some of this stuff. So I guess we'll leave this here. All right, so in a way, this is what we're gonna do. If I move this down, do I lose it? Oh, I lose it. So I have to make the image larger. All right, so the way, I don't want to redraw the whole thing, but basically, imagine, or not imagine, but in reality, if you have X870E, the only thing that changes is, whoops. Okay, I guess we're going to leave that bar there. But anyway, the point I'm making is, man, why does this have to be like this here? Just do this. There. So with X870E, you have another chipset. You get another one of these. You get a daisy chain. Basically, you have two of these connected now. So in here, you get a second PROM 21. Now we're talking about the E, X870E. So this one, okay, the top, nothing changes. This is exactly the same as X870. Nothing, they're identical because of the CPU lane. They're basically the socket. What changes is in the middle. You get an additional set of PCIe lanes, both Gen 3 and Gen 4. So here we have PCIe 4.0 X4 usable because it's 8. Remember I said it's well, actually 4, yeah, it's 8. Remember, the total lane count is 12. Or the total, yeah, the total is 12. So let me go ahead and write the legend here. So CPU has, or I guess, let's say AM5 has PCI 5.0 X28 total. We're just going to put absolutes here on the right. So total. The X870E has PCIe 4.0 X12. Well, okay, we're talking X870E, so it's basically 4 plus that. That's 12 plus the uplinks, so that'll be 16. And PCI 3.0 X4. Or no, X8. Okay, these are the absolutes. These are the total lane counts. X870 has PCI 4.0 X12 and PCI 3.0 X4. These are absolutes. These are not usable. These are the total. So you got to do the math. So 16 plus 4 plus 4 plus 4. So what is that? 28. That's where you get your 28 lanes for AM5. Now we want to add what did I didn't label this one. PCI 3.0 X4. Now we have to do X870E. X870E is 4 plus 4 plus 4. Hold on. 4, 8, 12 plus 8, that's 20. Okay, so did I get that? Okay. So the only thing incorrect is I'm missing 4, so it's actually 20 total, not 16. But the reason why I'm counting it as 16 is because this is kind of a duplicate, because you have the 4 going up into the CPU, but then you also have the 4 that are going down to this guy, but then this guy has the 4 that are going up to this guy. See? So that's why it's 20, but you can actually think of it more like 16. But I don't think the total lane count is that useful. The usable is what's actually more important. So for AM5, usable would be 16 plus 4 plus 4. That's 24 for AM5. Now if you do the chipset, 4 plus 8 is 12. So you have 12 Gen 4 usable, and then you have 4 plus 4 Gen 3, so you have 8 Gen 3 usable. See? So the only thing, so the difference between X870 and X870E is that there's this X870E has an additional chipset in the middle that adds 4 more lanes of Gen 3 and 4 more lanes of Gen 4. The reason why it doesn't have 8 is because 4 of this 8 are pointing up to the CPU, and the other 4 are pointing down to the other chipset. That's the reason why it only has 4. But what does that mean, though? That means that most likely the X870E will give you another M.2. for example. So if this is, let's just say M.2, this is M.2, this is GPU, and then down here we have another M.2. So this one achieves a lot more available stuff. In fact, this one can actually run native RAID because it doesn't need splitters. Basically, it can do 4. Remember, every SATA interface can either take an entire single lane of PCI 3.0 bandwidth, or it can run off of a splitter. So this could be a RAID capable motherboard if all 4 of these are SATA ports. This could be SATA. X4. 4 different SATA ports down here. Those support RAID. See? So that you can get, and on top of that, here's another interesting thing I just thought of. So I kind of want to remove what's down here now. Let's redo this. Delete this. See. Does the PCIe 4.0 X8 become X4 on the second PROM? No, it does not. It remains at 8. You know why? You know why it's X8 and the middle one is X4? I just explained on the middle one. So think of it like the chipset itself. So I forgot to label the lanes here. There's, whoops. There are 4. There's 4 upstream. There's 4 upstream lanes right here in the middle. That's where those lanes are. So think of it like this. The bottom chipset has, remember what I said? The chipset itself, 12 usable. 12 usable. Where are they? 8 of them are over here. 4 of them are over here. So I got 8 going this way. I have 4 as my uplink to the other chipset. So 8 plus 4 equals 12. Now that's from the point of view of the bottom chipset. Now let's do from the point of view of the middle chipset. The middle chipset has 4 lanes going here. It has 4 lanes going here. So we got 4, 4, and it has 4 lanes going downstream to the other chipset. So 4, 8, 12. That's the middle. The middle one has 12 like that. The bottom one has 12, 8, and 4 on the upstream is the 12 lanes. So meaning the chipset in the middle is exactly the same as the chipset on the bottom from a lane count perspective. The difference is the middle one only has 4 usable lanes because what would have been the second set of 4 lanes is used to daisy chain to the second chipset as downstream lanes. That is the reason why it only has 4 available, where the second chipset has 8 available. If they were going to daisy chain to another chipset, if there was going to be like a third one, for example, then this would only be X4, because the 4, 8, 12. See? So that's why those 2 chips, even though they're identical, they have different lane counts. They have different usable lane counts. That's a very good question, though. It's a very good question. How big is the difference between X670E and X870E? There's no difference. From a lane count, they're identical. So the only difference is going to come to better memory trace wiring on the newer boards. I can only imagine that would be one improvement. And the use of ASMedia 4242, that for USB 4. Because X670E doesn't have this. So if it does have it, it's an Intel Thunderbolt controller on X670E. But because AMD is making this mandatory, it's going to be kind of weird. I have a feeling X870E, we're going to see motherboards from X670 or X870E that are similar to Intel's Z790 in the sense that they're probably going to like peel off lanes from the GPU. They're going to do like a splitter for like an X8 or like an M.2 or something to give more M.2 drives. Because that's how Z790 is able to achieve the Gen 5 storage claim. They basically peel lanes off the GPU lanes to give you an M.2 drive that can do Gen 5 speed. So I have a feeling AMD's going to do the same thing with X870E, mainly because of this. Because this takes up 4 lanes of Gen 4. And what could have gone there was a traditional X4 slot for a capture card or another M.2 drive. See? So there's going to be probably, I would expect most X870E motherboards to have 4 M.2 drives, but there's going to be some compromises on lane sharing to pull that off consistently. Because let's count them. 1, 2, 3, and then 4 down here. But see, notice how I have this one off of a splitter. I'll put a splitter here because that way they're still offering PCI 4.0 X4. Now, the thing is, what they could do is they just make this native, don't have this splitter here, and then do the traditional thing that a lot of older motherboards used to have, right? Where you take 16 and you split. You have an X16, and then you have an X8 secondary PCIe slot. But as soon as you populate that X8 slot, your GPU will only run at X8 speed. Now, a lot of motherboards will probably do something like that, but keep in mind, the wild card here is PCIe Gen 3. What are they going to do with all these PCIe Gen 3 lanes? Because I'm just thinking hypothetically, like what could be like an Asus X870E Extreme. You know, like what could that motherboard offer? Because Asus could do some really interesting things. Like they could keep the M.2s here. They could put the GPU there. They have the splitter. I imagine they do the splitter. Like Asus would do the splitter. So, or the PLX, and then although they basically do a splitter. So you'd have like 16. It would either be, the combinations would be like X16, X0, X0, or X8, X8, X4, or X8, X0, X4. Like they could do that depending on what's connected. If they wanted to put, like for instance, another M.2 here, so they could put GPU. They could put the GPU 2, and they could put M.2. They could put all of these things on that PEG slot down there and just split it out. But then they could do interesting things as well. They could give you, for instance, 10 gigabit LAN. They could tie these two together and give you 10 gigabit LAN. Because remember, from the video that I did, it takes 2 lanes of PCI 3.0 to achieve 10 gigabit network speed. So they only need to solder 2 lanes of Gen 3 to put 10 gigabits. So they would have 10 gigabit, Wi-Fi 7, and a typical 2.5 or maybe 5G on the PCI 3.0. And then they would just have the SATA. You'd get 4 SATA drives. But if they really want to crank out more, they could do this. They could do SATA SATA on the second one. And then they could do splitters. You know what I'm saying? They could put as media splitters. Splitter and splitter number 2. And that way you get 2 more drives. You basically would get essentially 1, 2, 1, 2. So you would get, so you basically have a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You would have 6 SATA where 2 support RAID, the other 4 don't. They could do something like that on a Crosshair Extreme. This would be the fully. This is what you were talking about, guys. Is a $1,000 motherboard. We're basically speccing out a $1,000 motherboard from ASUS because it has everything that you need basically. 6 SATA, some RAID, 10 gigabit, Wi-Fi 7, 5 or 2.5, doesn't matter. You get USB 4, you get 1, 2, 3 Gen 5, 3 Gen 5 M.2s, 2 Gen 4 M.2s. So you actually have 1, 2, 3, 4. You have 5 NVMe drives on this board. And you have an X4 and you have an X8. So it would have an X16, X8, X4 in terms of PCIe lane connectivity. The only caveat is your GPU, if you do use the 5th M.2 and the X8 slot, your GPU runs at X8 speed instead of X16. That would be one compromise because you'd be subject to that resource table. And then also on top of that, if you want to use, for example, a 4K capture card down here, you can't use this 5th or 4th M.2. So you could do 4 M.2s and your GPU would run at X8, and that's acceptable. But then if you're going to do a capture card internally, you can't use the PCIe Gen 4 NVMe drive at the very bottom. So that would be a couple of compromises on this sort of board, but this would still be a $1,000 board. Now, having said that, the nice thing about USB 4, which we haven't talked about, well, I actually wanted to keep that. The thing that we haven't talked about is USB 4, you can get an AverMedia Thunderbolt, a Live Gamer Bolt, and do 4K 60 with HDR capture support off of a USB 4 interface. So that is something that I plan to test. Well, actually, I've already tested it on a laptop that has USB 4 on a Lenovo laptop, so I know that works. And that's on an AMD CPU as well. So you could not need to use this if you use an external capture card. Like if you're using a capture card. So the nice thing about USB 4 is it opens the door to be able to use external capture cards as opposed to internal. So keep that in mind. But that's the reason why X870E is the way to go if you're a power user, because you get way more options as shown here in terms of capability. Does that make sense? Did I just confuse everybody? Basically, here's the TLDR. And this was already in a video that I did earlier. X870E is very similar to X670E. Okay? X870 is very similar to, and here's where people are going to be like, wait, what? This is the part where everyone's going to get shocked, because people are probably waiting for me to say something, and I'm about to say something completely different. So X870 is very similar to, let's see if anybody knows. I'm not going to reveal the answer yet. Who in the chat knows? Okay, if you understand what we've talked about here, which of AMD's current generation motherboards is X870 very similar to? Nero says B650E. Does anybody disagree? Well, congratulations, that's the correct answer. B650E. Matt said B650, no. B650E. X870 is basically a rebadged or a revised B650E. And the answer actually comes from the CPU lanes. This is the answer. B650 doesn't have... So B650 by itself has the same lane count, but the difference is B650 doesn't give you 24 PCI 5.0 CPU lanes. It gives you PCI 4.0. So that's the difference. Why is it different from X670? Because X870 is not like X670. There's a reason. And it actually goes back to what I just said literally probably less than a minute ago. It has to do with PCI Gen 5. So, B650 gives you Gen 4 CPU lanes, not Gen 5. It only gives you, I believe B650 only gives you 4 Gen 5 lanes, and the remaining 20 lanes are Gen 4. And that is the same, that holds true for X670. So the only difference is up here at the top, these CPU lanes on B650E and X670E, those lanes are Gen 5. On a non-E, if there's no E on the older motherboards, they're Gen 4 lanes. Only 4 of them are required to be Gen 5. That is the only difference between the E and the non-E for the X600 series and B600 series. So remember that. If it has an E, it means the full CPU lanes are Gen 5. If there's no E, they're not Gen 5. Now, that is not true for X870, because X870 is basically B650E in disguise. It's basically B650E in disguise. See, in a way, I think AMD's naming convention with the 600 series was easier to understand because the E meant Gen 5 for the full 24. If it did not have an E, it meant that 20 of these lanes are Gen 4 and only 4 of them are Gen 5. So now it's not the same because X870 has 24 Gen 5 lanes, which is the reason why I keep saying it's basically B650E rebadged with refinements in terms of the board manufacturing. So, because B650E is a single chip, single PROM21, X670E is a dual PROM21. So, because that was the difference between B and X. If you had an X600 motherboard, you had dual PROM21. If you had a B600 motherboard, you had a single PROM21. But now AMD's creating the redoing it, and it's actually going to be a little bit more confusing, but not really. If you didn't know much about the previous generation boards, then you're not going to really be confused, because all you got to remember is if it has an E If it's the X870E, it's a dual chipset. If it's an X870 with no E, it's a single chipset. That's the only difference. In terms of lanes, they're both, all the CPU lanes are Gen 5. So none of that changes. So these are the ones that carry over. And I don't know what AMD is going to do for the lower end chipset. Like, I think B650 is probably just going to stay B650. I mean, I don't know. They're going to probably rename it something else. Probably B850 at some point. But, you know, but that's it. B650E, X670E. They now are X870, X870E. So I guess the only other thing that I left out here, which I didn't need to draw, was the dual memory. You got dual memory channels. You got A channel. You got channel A. You got channel B. And then you have, you know, 2 DPC or 1 DPC boards. So if I have a two DPC board, I've got 4 memory sticks or 4 memory slots. You know what I'm saying? So I got my A1, A2, my B1, B2, etc. The font's too big, but you guys get the idea. That's where the memory goes. And then we got USB just like all over this as well. But if I start drawing all the USB ports, this thing's gonna look like a porcupine. So we'll just leave it at that. But really, the only difference, honestly, the only difference is this thing. AMD making USB 4 mandatory, basically it's gonna create some challenges for the motherboard manufacturers, because they're having it basically forces them to allocate 4 lanes of Gen 4 to an ASM 4242, and because of that, they're gonna have a harder time figuring out how to place the NVMe drives. You know what I'm saying? Because like if all the old motherboards had 4 NVMe, typically they all had 4 NVMe. Like the 4th NVMe was typically this one. But if I have to put USB 4 on my board now, that means my 4th M.2 is going to be much harder to figure out where to put the 4th M.2. Do I want to steal lanes from the graphics card like Intel does? Or do I want to run a splitter, which is probably more likely to happen, run a splitter off of the bottom of the board so the user has the option of either X4 open or 4th M.2. You know what I'm saying? Like, I feel like there's going to be a lot of this going on. There's going to be a whole lot of this scenario for that 4th, in order for them to achieve the 4th M.2. And the higher end boards are going to do both. Like, I can see it now. Asus Crosshair Extreme is going to put the splitter, and it's also going to put another splitter and run one off the GPU, so they can claim that they got 5 NVMe. I can see it now. Or they may spam Gen 3 M.2. They could do that. That's a really interesting idea, Nero. I didn't think of that. I don't see them doing that, though. You know what I'm saying? I just don't see that happening because from a marketing standpoint, it doesn't sound good. Like, they don't want to market their motherboard as saying Gen 3 on, you know, drive number 3 and 4 or drive number 5 or something, versus their competitor saying that they've got like Gen 4 everywhere or Gen 5 everywhere. But the reality is their competitor is basically stealing all the GPU lanes imaginable. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know. I don't see that happening. I feel like there's going to be a lot of ASMedia splitters for hard drives, though, for the SATA. I feel like there's going to be a lot of that. For sure. There's going to be a lot of that stuff happening. Where they don't support RAID. Because I've seen that on a lot of B650 motherboards. That's why I'm saying that. So I can see that happening here. If you see, basically, let's put it this way. if you see an X870E motherboard with eight, not 4 or 6, but 8 SATA ports, you know that they've got a lot of splitters. Even with 6, they probably have a splitter or 2. So that's consumer desktop right there. Very different from Threadripper. This actually makes me feel good about having a Threadripper system as my main workstation, because I don't ever have to worry about, like, oh, if I plug in this second GPU, am I going to lose lanes on, or am I going to turn off 2 of my NVMe? Like, I don't have to worry about that. You know what I'm saying? So, but that's a different market segment, so different use case. If it's anything, your Asus B550 has a switch on one of the SATA and the M, and your M.2 Gen 3 on the bottom of the board. They could. I could see something like that happening for the X870. See, here's what I'm gonna say. I would tell you guys, if you're going to buy an X870, because most likely X870 is going to be a lot cheaper than X870E. Like, we're talking like $200 cheaper. So I'm going to give you guys price points. I'm going to guess at the price. So now, this might be completely wrong, but I'm going to tell you, my assumption is X870 is going to be priced around anywhere from like $179 to like $350. We'll say $349, or actually no, like $379. This is the price point for X870. X870E is going to be a lot more. So X870E, probably the cheapest ones, the lowest cost X870E is probably going to come from ASRock. And those, but see, I don't know how they're going to be able to make their platform cheaper this time around, because they are forced to use as media USB 4 controllers. And that costs money, because those are brand new. They haven't been around that long. So the economies of scale are not there yet. So I'm going to say, like, X870E at launch is going to be expensive. I think it's going to be expensive. So I'm going to say, like, the lowest N1 is the lowest. The starting out low is going to be like $349. And this is going to be like the cheapest one, you know, probably like very little SATA, definitely not 10 gig LAN, no postcode debug, you know, that kind of stuff. But it has USB 4 bolted on there. But then it's going to go all the way up to like $999 or more. So the price point on X870E is going to be kind of really wonky. It's going to be like this really wide range of bargain bin. Like, it's missing so many basic things like postcode debug and all that stuff. All the way up to like the one that we've shown here. This is the one we've drawn on the stream. This is basically a $1,000 motherboard from Asus. This is what I have shown you guys. I have indirectly given you guys the block diagram for an X870E Crosshair Extreme. This is going to be a $1,000, or maybe even no, it's probably going to be a $1,000 motherboard from Asus. I'm sure of it. It's going to have 10 gig LAN. It's going to have your X4. It's going to have 5 M.2. It's going to have USB 4. You know, it's going to have, like, all the things. RAID on some ports, not on all of them. Wi-Fi 7. You know, all the latest standards. So, expensive flagship motherboard. Okay, there we go. Keep that there. Price point. Just buy an X670E if you want an 870. It depends, Matt. I would say it depends on a lot of things there, Because yeah, you could probably get a pretty good X670E. Like I'll tell you guys, like the ASRock Steel Legend is very impressive. This one, see, here's an example. Here's an example of a good, like this is roughly anywhere from like $279 to $300. But it comes with an anti-sag GPU bracket. It has 4 M.2 drive slots, all the good stuff. Like this, you could get a pretty good deal on this, I would imagine, with Zen 5. The only problem is you're gonna have to update the BIOS. You know, so you got to do BIOS flashback, and if you don't know how to do that, see, there's a lot of normies that are not gonna like the idea of having to do a BIOS update just so they can install their CPU and have it work. That's the problem. That's why I was emphasizing why AMD needs to make sure that X870 launches with Zen 5. Otherwise, it's going to be a botched launch, and people are going to largely ignore the CPUs if they can't actually buy the motherboards that are supposed to go with them. Nero saying you would want X870 over... Oh, X870 over 670E? For the USB 4? Yeah. Yeah, I could see that. Well, what I'm saying is... This is what I'm saying, though. Like, the price point on X670E has gone way down. So you can get a good board like a Steel Legend. Or I'll give you guys another example. The Gigabyte X670 Aorus Elite AX. This one is another really good one. This is a sub $300. This is like a $250, $60, $70 motherboard from Gigabyte. X670. This is X670, not 670E. So you know what that means? There's no Gen 5. There's only Gen 5 on the top M.2 drive. The GPU slot is Gen 4 because it doesn't have the E. Now, you can actually add USB 4 to this board, though. This is the thing that I think is going to be kind of weird when it comes to AMD mandating USB 4 as mandatory. Because USB 4 on these older boards is optional. Which means I can take this X4 slot and I can add USB 4 to it. You know why? Because I can go and get... Hold up, what? I can go and get... well, hold on. GC Maple Ridge. I can go get this. I can get one of these from Gigabyte. This has the Intel Thunderbolt 4 controller with USB 4 ports on it. I can plug this in to this motherboard and it'll work. You know why? Because I already have done it. I have YouTube videos on showing that. I have the entire walkthrough tutorial. So you can actually add USB 4 to an X670 or X670E board, or even B650 or B650E board, provided that the motherboard supports it, though. If it doesn't support it, then it's not going to work. So there are some caveats with last generation parts when it comes to USB 4. But in general, I still would... If it was me, I would still go with X870 or X870E over any of the 600 series. You don't need USB 4. You're going to get a Gigabyte X670E or its master since the open box regular 670 didn't work and they had to return it. Okay. You have a Thunderbolt 3 header on the B550, but you don't have a need to... Which board is that again? Oh, the Asus. Yeah, that one. Yeah, I know exactly which board, because look, that one... Asus Thunderbolt EX4. Yeah. This. I have this. and then like a chair pops up behind me. I have this. I have it. In fact, I actually have all three of the add-in cards. I have the Asus one, I have the ASRock one, and I have the Gigabyte one. Now, the only one I have not done a video on is the Asus one, but I do have this Thunderbolt card from Asus. I've got all three of them. MSI doesn't have one. Only the other three do. But what I can tell you is if you go to support here on Asus's website, and we go to manual, and we go to compatibility, and then we go to the card compatibility list, here we go. These are the motherboards that work with it. Check it out. AMD B550 chipset. And remember, this is the Thunderbolt 4. This is the same chip. The thing that's in here is the exact same chip that is inside an X670E Crosshair Hero and a Crosshair Extreme and an Asus ProArt Creator. The X670E Asus ProArt includes this very card soldered directly onto the motherboard. But if you wanted to add it, here are the motherboards. ROG Strix B550XE Gaming Wi-Fi. Strix B550-E Gaming, the Wi-Fi version. The Wi-Fi 2 version, I don't even know what that means. What's Wi-Fi 2? F Gaming, B550A Gaming, Tough Gaming Pro, Tough Gaming Plus, Wi-Fi, Tough Gaming Plus, Wi-Fi 2, Tough Gaming B550 Plus, Prime B550 Plus, Pro B550M-C/C. That is the weird. Okay, that's. Don't put slashes in your product names, Asus. That what? Really? Okay, here's the newer one. AMD X670. ROG Strix X670E-E Gaming Wi-Fi. 670EE-F. E-8 Prime Wi-Fi. Tough Gaming Plus Wi-Fi. Tough Gaming Plus. Prime. So you can see B650, ROG Strix, B650E. So the point that I'm making is, okay, you know what? This is Zen 3. This is Zen 2 and Zen 3, and even Zen 1. This is AM4. You can run Thunderbolt and USB 4 on a AM4 motherboard. Now, there's not a lot of them, but there are some of them. These are the newer ones. Then you have AM5, both X670 and B650. Here are the options. Now, you guys are probably wondering, like, okay, where's the ProArt and where's the Crosshair? Well, they're not on this list because they already have the card integrated into the board. So why would they need to add the chipset when they already have it included? See, that's why they're not on this list. You have the B550-F. So right here, ROG Strix B550-F Gaming. Your motherboard supports the Asus Thunderbolt EX4. So you could literally add USB 4, because remember guys, USB 4 equals Thunderbolt 3/Thunderbolt 4. They are identical in spec. They're 40 gigabit USB-C, and they support PCIe tunneling. So you could basically add USB 4 if you wanted by using this card. Now remember, this requires PCI Gen 3 X4. This is the reason why I make a big deal about the X4 slot when it comes to these motherboards. Now, keeping that in mind, now that we're talking about the newer motherboards, the decision becomes easier because they're doing a lot of the work for you by automatically mandating that the motherboard manufacturer solder that chipset onto the motherboard. So you don't need an add-in card. They're basically forcing you into USB 4. But like Met said, he doesn't need USB 4. And I would tend to agree. Not everybody needs USB 4. So being shoehorned into USB 4, you could end up compromising on NVMe drive count, for example. Because it's going to be more challenging to fit more NVMe drives without compromising on other things. So some people the people who don't need USB 4, they're probably sitting here thinking, man, it sounds like X670E is actually better than B8 or X870E because it doesn't force me to go USB 4, which means there's less likelihood of lane and resource sharing on the older motherboards. And I would tend to agree with that opinion. So these are the sort of things. See, these are the kind of things though, guys. Like when people are doing new builds, like when people are considering a new build, a computer upgrade, they're gonna upgrade their PC. They're gonna do a full new build. They've had their computer for 5 years or more, and they're thinking of doing a brand new build. What's the latest and greatest? These are the sort of things that they need to think of. The decision making, because the motherboard you choose ultimately determines what you can and cannot do with your PC. Strictly from a connectivity standpoint. All the PCs can play games. All the PCs can connect the fastest GPU. But not all of them can support 4, maybe 5 NVMe or RAID, if anyone actually needs it. Or 10 gigabit LAN natively. You know, like these are the sort of things, or USB 4 natively. So these are the sort of questions that you need to, or the determining factors that you at least need to think about when you're doing a new build, because someone might just look at a motherboard and be like, oh, that motherboard has such good RGB, I need to get that thing. Not knowing that that motherboard is basically trash when it comes to connectivity, compared to another one that has a little bit less RGB. So this is the reason why what I tend to refer to like RGB and the infinity mirrors and all the like the gamery stuff. It looks like the people who trick out like their Honda Racers and stuff. You know, that's what it looks like to me. It doesn't look mature. It doesn't look understated and business capable. And it doesn't look like a power user's machine. You know what I'm saying? Like the RGB stuff, it's cool to look at, but it's just a bunch of gimmicks at the end of the day. Like what I actually care about, like when I'm evaluating a motherboard for purchasing for a new build, I want to know what are the caveats? What are the areas where the resource sharing could cause a conflict with using the PC? What's going to limit me with this motherboard? And assuming there is some sort of limitation, how severe is that limitation? These are the sort of things that actually matter when you're doing a new build, not all the RGB. Now, some people might disagree with me on that, and that's fine. If they're just building a gamer PC, they don't need any of this stuff. They don't think they're ever going to need any of this stuff. They have no aspiration of being a real live streamer who actually does things, or a content creator in any capacity. They'll never think twice about the PCIe lanes and the drive counts and that sort of thing. Well, yeah, then go ahead and pick whatever board looks cool and is subjectively the best looking one, and, you know, whatever. Brand aside, whether it's Asus, MSI, Gigabyte, ASRock, BioStar even, doesn't really matter then. IO takes precedence over RGB. Yeah. I consider a lot of that. See, sometimes I like to have RGB, but the reality is, when I have RGB on a case or a motherboard, you know what I do with the RGB? I configure it to statically be the white color. Just be a white light in the case, and that's it. I don't want to see rainbow vomit everywhere. I don't want to see waves, glowing, transitioning of the light. No, I don't want to see it. Just statically set it to white and let it sit there, and the computer goes on the floor, under the desk, so I don't hear it, and we're good. That's how I personally use my PCs. That's how I've always used my PCs. They've always gone on the floor. They're never on the desk because I don't want them wasting desk space. So they go on the floor because that's where the towers belong. Unless you have a cat, and sometimes the cat will like try to mess with the side panel or whatever. But It's not really a problem, you know? Asus ProArt best looking motherboard. If you like the... You know what the Asus motherboard, the Asus ProArt, that style makes me think of... it makes me think of those, like... remember, like, the game controllers that were see-through? What was it, like the Atomic one? Where it was like you could see the electronics underneath. It was like the clear plastic. That's what the ProArt makes you think of. The ProArt is nice. The ProArt is a nice board. The Creator. Yeah, this one. This is a nice board. There is one huge criticism I have of it, though. One criticism of this. Mad Catz controls. Yeah, exactly. My criticism of this is it is a $459.99 motherboard, and it doesn't have a debug postcode. Why is there no postcode debug in the top right corner here? Like, come on, Asus. You're charging almost $500 and you don't put a postcode on the motherboard? I would think ProArt is typically for the content creator. And if a content creator is having a problem with their PC, they're going to want to be able to debug the code, or they're going to at least want to be able to call support and give them the debug code on the LED if they're not smart enough to Google it and even understand what the postcode debug code means. So that's my biggest pet peeve of the ProArt, because I think the ProArt, this is an excellent motherboard, especially if you're doing anything with Linux. This is a very good board because it has a lot of pass-through for like GPU pass-through. This motherboard includes this Thunderbolt controller. The Asus Thunderbolt EX4, it is physically soldered onto this motherboard. It is in the motherboard. So that is the reason why you get dual USB 4 up to 40 gigabit transfer speed. It's doing that via the Intel Thunderbolt controller. That's how it does it. But the newer version, so for example, when we get the X870E ProArt Creator, the successor to this will not use the Intel controller. It will use the newer ASMedia 4242. This is the one that will be in the new ProArt. It'll actually be in like pretty much almost all, well, it will be in all the X870 motherboards because AMD mandates USB 4, and this is how they're doing it. They're using ASMedia. It's a board for designers. You design your own postcode debug. I was going to say something witty there in response to that, but for some reason I don't think that the people who design circuit boards are the people that use this. I feel like it's more for the art people, if you know what I'm saying. Like, but see, it's got USB 4. Both of these support DisplayPort out, by the way. And it has DisplayPort input as well. So, really nice board overall. I just think that they kind of screwed up on not putting that postcode on there, because the problem with this is it's like they've got this, but they don't have the postcode. Whereas, like, if I was gonna get, here's what I would do. Like, if I was gonna get the, if I was gonna build a content creator machine and it was Asus, I'd probably go with this. I'd probably go with the Hero myself. This is what I would get. If I was gonna go Asus, and if I was gonna build a content creator thing, I know it sounds weird because it's like, this is supposed to be the content creator board. I would go with the gamer. Actually, this one's not really the gamer one. The gamer one is the Strix. This one is the overclocker board. This is the overclocker. Because this is crosshair. Crosshair is the overclockers board. This is the enthusiast brand. This is the flagship brand. This is the $650 flagship brand. So I'd probably go with this because A, it's not $1,000. That's the Extreme. So it's still a lot cheaper than the Extreme. And it has Thunderbolt 4. It has USB 4. It has the same thing. This one, just like the ProArt, also includes the Thunderbolt 4 controller soldered into it. It says Republic of Gamers on it, though. Yeah, that's because they throw it under ROG because they want ROG to be considered the thing. But yeah, this is the overclocker board, though. It's meant for the overclocking crowd. So, but yeah, the Crosshair, because I have 3 Crosshair boards, guys. Like, just saying. Not this one. Not this one. Now, I know somebody who subscribed to the channel who has 3 Crosshair current generation boards. But I've got 3. Wait, why did I reload this? I have the X870 Crosshair 8 Hero Wi-Fi. So I've got this one, and then I also have X870 Crosshair Hero. And then I also have the, man, what was that thing called? Formula. It was X9 or 990FX Crosshair Crosshair 5 Formula Z. I've got this one too. Does it even have the picture? Well, okay, well, this one's super old, so we'll have to find like a different one. But anyway, this is not the one that I have. That's the Zen Plus one. Crosshair 6 Hero. This one. So I've got this board. This is the board that I had with Zen 1, so with the 1800X. And then I have, oh wait, I did, what? Wait a minute, what? Crosshair 8 Hero Wi-Fi. Did I click on the wrong one? Oh no, this one. Yeah, this one. This is the one that I have. This is the one that I got when I went to Zen 2. So Zen 1 used this. I skipped Zen Plus. Zen 2 3800X, I got this in 2019. Then I did a drop-in socket upgrade to Zen 3, the 5800X. So my 5800X is in this board right now. My 3800X is not in this board. This board is in storage. I'm not actually using it. So I have a lot of experience with Crosshair, with the Crosshair brand, and it is Asus's best motherboard series, for sure. Like, ask any overclocker, ask anyone who actually does overclocking competitions. They'll tell you, like, there's only a few boards. There's only a few realistic boards that they'll actually use. Crosshair is one of them. You'll never see overclockers using a ProArt. You'll never see them using a Strix. They'll only be using, like, Crosshair if it's Asus. They'll never use Prime. They'll never use TUF. They'll never use any of those lower-end brands. They'll only use the Crosshair brand. This is the original. This is the original. In fact, I said this before on a previous stream. Do you guys know that ROG, when the Republic of Gamers brand first started, the very first Crosshair motherboard was the original ROG motherboard? Meaning ROG started life as a brand with the AMD CPU line. Not Intel CPUs, not any GPU brand. No, it started as a motherboard brand for AMD. It was the ROG Crosshair. That was the very first Republic of Gamers product. So there was a lot of history with the Crosshair. So they have to live up to that name when it comes to an overclocking board. So, I wish there was a picture of this one. I'll have to probably go to Google Images. Crosshair 5 Formula Z. That's PDF. Well, it's old. It's an old board, but I should just go here. Yeah, it's basically this one. Yeah, this one. Yep, that's the board. I think because there's two different ones actually. I gotta make sure this. Yeah, the one I have has the emblem like this. Because there's two different ones. There's also this one, which is not the one I have. This is the older one. This is the Crosshair Formula. This is the one that was meant to go with Bulldozer, the FX8150. But the one that I have is this one, the Formula Z. This one goes with the pile driver, the FX8350. This is from 2012. I got this motherboard, I think it was like very end of 2012. And this was back before they put the shrouds over the I/O. So that's why it looks like that. But I have a Crosshair 5. I still have this board somewhere. I have a 6. This was the first one for Zen 1 in 2017. I have an 8 in 2019 because the 7 was in 2018. I skipped that generation. And then after that, I don't have any Asus boards that are newer than that. I don't know, Marcelo. That's a good question. I was thinking about considering it, but only... There's a couple of criteria that an X870 needs to prove to me. The newer motherboards have to prove to me that they can do higher memory speeds consistently. The other thing that they have to prove... or what I'm really curious to see is how does an X870 or X870E handle 4 sticks of memory, 4 sticks of DDR5, because 4 sticks of DDR5 on consumer desktop has been a problem. It's been very hit or miss for a lot of people, and I've had to do a lot of videos. There's a lot of people that desire 4 sticks of RAM in their build, even though it's actually worse overall than 2 sticks, dual channel. So I've tried to make videos that show how to do 4 sticks, but every time I make those videos, it creates a lot of questions, and people are always like trying these things and they're having trouble doing it and achieving the speeds that they want. And everybody's motherboard's different. Everybody's RAM is different. Everybody's CPU has a different memory controller. There's just too much silicon variety and variance that I can't help them all the time with trying to figure out why they're not able to just copy paste my settings and have it work. Because there rarely is anyone using the same motherboard as me, and even more rare do they ever have the same exact RAM kit that I'm using. So that's the reason why the 4 sticks of memory thing is just really, really hard. And then people just don't follow instructions. You know, like when I tell people you got to put your first, like if you bought 2 separate kits of 2 sticks each, you got to put one kit in A channel. That means the 2 first sticks need to be right next to each other. Then the other kit of RAM needs to be in the other 2 slots next to each other, not crisscrossed. You know, because a lot of people are doing the crisscross thing. I'm like, why are you guys doing that? That's not how it's supposed to be. So they flip it around and then it works. So, but a lot of people are wanting to do 4 sticks of DDR5, and it's a real challenge with the current generation motherboards and the current generation CPUs. So that's the reason why hopefully Zen 5 improves in that area. But I think the motherboards are going to be a huge factor in making 4 sticks of memory a lot more easier to pull off. because that's certainly true with these. Let me tell you, the Crosshair 6 Hero for Zen 1, this motherboard it's still my favorite looking motherboard, but it is garbage at trying to hit high memory speeds. This thing, even with a 5800X, I can barely get 3200 DDR4 working on my ancient Crosshair 6. Meanwhile, with the newer Crosshair 8, which is meant for Ryzen 3000, but also works with Ryzen 5000, obviously, with BIOS updates. This thing can do 3600 easily with 4 sticks, dual channel, 64 gigs of RAM. No problem. With this newer motherboard. That is something that is impossible to do on the older first gen Zen 1 motherboard series, the X870. And this is probably the reason why, at its core, I recommend people get the newer motherboards, because in my mind, this is like X670. This is like X870. So that is the reason why I always recommend, if you're doing a new build and you're getting a brand new CPU, latest and greatest, you want to get the motherboards that are meant for those CPUs. Because I've tested 3800X, 5800X with a first gen Zen 1 board, and it works. The CPU runs, it's fine. But if you're trying to do memory overclocking, no. And if you're going to do 4 sticks of memory, no. The 4 sticks of memory, if you're doing single rank, so like 32 gigs, 4x8, you can do 3200. Max. That's as far as it goes. Don't even dare try 3600. It's not going to work, even on single rank, on this old motherboard. See, those are the sort of improvements that we got out of the newer chipset, the newer motherboard technology. So I expect similar improvements with the new motherboards for Zen 5. So this is probably the best way to conclude this live stream in the whole theme about, oh, should I get X670 with Zen 5 or wait for X870? Probably X870. That's why I hope, going back to this article, I really hope that this is not true, because if that's true, and if the newer motherboards don't come until the end of September, that's literally 60 days, that's close to 2 months after the Zen 5 availability. That is going to be a disaster. That puts these so close to Intel's Arrow Lake that by that time, people are probably going to be either waiting, just straight up waiting for X3D, Ryzen 9000 X3D, or they're going to start looking at Intel and start considering, oh, what does Intel do? What can you do? You know, like they're going to start thinking, and you don't want, like if you're a CPU company like AMD, why are you giving your competitors an opportunity to poach potential customers from you because you're making dumb decisions like launch the motherboards 2 months after the see what I'm saying? Like, it sounds so retarded. Like, that's the sort of thing that if I was a vice president at AMD, I would be escalating. Like, if this is real due to some kind of weird supply chain thing or AS media nonsense or whatever it is, whatever the delay is, if it's as media again, man, because these guys screwed them over last time. This was supposed to be an X670, but it got delayed. That's the reason why the Intel Thunderbolt controllers ended up in X670. That's the reason. So if it's another stupid as media delay causing these motherboards to not be able to be delivered on time, man, dude, like, for real, AMD should just be like, hey, Intel, just, I'm sorry, man, just give us some of those Thunderbolt control. Like, it's so stupid. This is dumb. If that's real, if this is legitimately real, and these motherboards don't come out until 2 months after the CPU's launch, that's just the biggest fail of the year. Well, they should be, Nero. Like, that's what I'm saying. This better be fake news. If this is legit real news, then somebody somewhere at AMD or somewhere at As Media or whoever screwed up so bad that there could be some career-changing events in line if this is in fact real for some people somewhere on the Ryzen team. Because that's bad. You don't like throw your opportunity to the wind and open the door for your competition to come in and like, hey, take our customers, or because now they have the potential to evaluate Intel. You know what I mean? That better not be true. This better not be real. This better be some fake news. Anyway. Yeah, that's pretty terrible. All right, let's see. One more thing. AMD explains why Ryzen 9000 with 8 cores doesn't need higher TDP, but lower. Okay. Okay, here we go. This is an interesting one. In a recent interview with Tom's Hardware, Lamahasha just subbed to the channel. Thanks for the sub. Appreciate that sub. In a recent interview with Tom's Hardware, AMD talked about the upcoming Ryzen 9000 scheduled for release next month. Okay, you know what I would ask? Are the motherboards launching with them? That's like the first question I would have. A very popular topic that was discussed extensively later was the reduced power requirement. I would ask about this too. This is a good question. So the company successfully lowered the power demand for the new SKUs from 105 to just 65. Here's what they had to say. All of those things are pretty big differences compared to previous small steps and launches. We're going back on TDP because it turns out our 8 cores are so good we don't need higher TDP. So I think it's a pretty stark comparison. You know what that means, guys? That means that the 6 and the 8 core are going to be the really fun overclocking chips. These are going to be the overclocking chips because they're starting out so low on TDP. That means that you'll be able to push them up. You'll be easily able to boost them to the 150 or 105 watt TDP pretty easily. So they'll probably get better performance if overclocked. This is actually a good thing. Like, see, this is why that motherboard story better be fake, man. Like, because here's the thing. AMD could have a real winner on their hands with this. Think about it. The numbers that they've shown have shown what? Like anywhere from, what, 14, 19% IPC? Just IPC? Same clock speed. So you overclock, you basically raise the power limit so the boost algorithm goes more aggressive. That means you're going to get a bigger percentage uplift than just the IPC uplift. You know what I'm saying? So these could be some really interesting chips to play around with as an enthusiast. So like the 6 and the 8 core seem like the way to go on these if you're overclocking. The dual CCD is the one that there's less info on that. What we do know is the 9950X is faster. In general, it's faster than the 14900K in basically everything. But that begs the question, how does it stack up to X3D? Like, how does the 9950X stack up to a 7950X 3D? You know? In multi-thread, it's going to completely destroy the 7950X 3D. That's for sure. But in gaming, that's where things get interesting. The 14900K loses to the Zen 5 in gaming. But again, it also lost to the X3D Zen 4 most of the time. So I don't know, like, what maybe the percentage differences are single digit versus 7000 X3D to 9000, but it could also go either way. In some games, Zen 5 might win if the game, like, the way I see it is if the game favored Intel's clock speed over X3D, I think the Zen 5 will beat X3D in those games. But if the game favored the Vcache and the Vcache was curb stomping the 14900K, then I think Zen 5 might actually lose to a 7800 X3D in the gaming benchmark. See, that's kind of what I'm expecting to see. I think that would be consistent with what AMD has shown. So, but we'll see. Okay. David McAfee further states that lower power targets allow AMD to deliver more performance without increasing power and heat. The Ryzen 9000 SKUs have the same maximum frequency, but the frequency residency, efficiency of the lid, and thermal changes allowed AMD to lift the performance higher. Maybe that means that they made some revisions to the IHS. In fact, McAfee says they brought their 9000 series. Okay, here we go. Very close to X3D chips in terms of gaming. As already stated by Donnie Walagrowski in the same interview, the AMD Ryzen 9000 series will not be faster for gaming than existing 7000 X3D models, but they will be close enough. See, okay, that basically means that it's going to be like a 14900K compared to an X3D. Like, in non-gaming workloads, Ryzen 9000 will destroy the X3D, but in gaming, it's basically going to be a closer... They're going to be closer together than the 14900K and the X3D. Like, the gap between 14900K and X3D is a certain percentage. The gap between Ryzen 9000 versus X3D will be a smaller gap. That's basically what I'm assuming is going to happen. But they will be close enough, see? So they're acknowledging that there's a lot of games that benefit from X3D. And the frequency, speed advantage that Zen 5 has, coupled with IPC increases, is not enough to bridge that gap completely. So very interesting stuff. What this means, though, I think the bigger picture here is that if anybody is thinking of upgrading, this potentially means that Ryzen 9000 X3D is going to be a monster gaming CPU. Because if this thing is very close to X3D, it's basically within single-digit percentage in gaming, while being way more efficient, because we're talking like 65 watts versus, the TDP on the X3D is, I think, like 105 to 120, if I'm not mistaken. So the efficiency on the Ryzen 9000, like not even overclocked, is very close to X3D in gaming, and much better than it in productivity. So that means the X3D 9000 is going to be so much better. Like, man, dude, it's gonna be a lot better. Well, you missed the entire breakdown for the chipset stuff, but we're kind of wrapping up here. But yeah, it sounds like X3D is going to be, like, Zen 5 X3D is gonna be really, really good. Like, think about it like this. If Zen 4 turbos up to 95 Celsius, then when you put X3 on it, they cap to like the upper 80s. Now you look at Zen 5. Zen 5 is 65 watts and much faster than Zen 4 non-X3D. Now you go and put X3D on top of like a 65 watt part. Man, that thing is gonna be so good. Like, in terms of the energy efficiency and the gaming performance. Yeah, man, Zen 5 X3D is probably the way to go. And I know a lot of people online have already told me this. Like, they're just going to wait for X3D, Zen 5. They're just going to stick with their 7800X3D or whatever, or their older CPU from whatever generation, and just wait for X3D. The only problem with that is I think that's going to also mean that at some point they will evaluate or at least look at the results of Intel's Arrow Lake. So the problem with the X3D is that you're going to wait, and then by waiting so long, you're going to have to go through the woods of the Intel Core Ultra Arrow Lake and see how that does. So we'll see. We'll see what happens with the Intel Arrow Lake, because the Intel Arrow Lake is very mysterious. It is mysterious. At Computex, they hid the socket. The press was not allowed to look at the socket, even though everybody already knows what the socket is. So they were very, very tight-lipped on any sort of desktop stuff on Intel's platform. So we'll see what Intel's platform does. That one is going to be really weird, or it's going to be interesting, because Intel's basically going to tell everyone that has instability issues with 13, 14th gen that they need to upgrade to 15th gen to fix the problems. I mean, like, that's the real fix. If your CPU's damaged, you know, like, forget about the RMA. Just buy a new CPU and a new motherboard while you're at it. Well, Meteor Lake was not good, Nero. Meteor Lake didn't perform well. In fact, Meteor Lake lost in a lot of benchmarks to AMD's previous, like last year's AMD Ryzen mobile, as well as Intel's 13th gen on mobile. So Meteor Lake won in some categories, but it was kind of a mixed bag. So the MSI flaws, the Meteor Lake proof. Yeah, well, Meteor Lake, I'm just saying Meteor Lake in general, in mobile was not good. Like, Snapdragon X Elite is basically using Meteor Lake to make the Snapdragon look so much better than it actually is. But the reality is because Meteor Lake is so mediocre, it makes Snapdragon look so good. But here's the thing. AMD's Strix mobile is coming out like next month. That's when X86 retakes the crown, because all this stuff about Snapdragon and ARM, and man, you need an ARM laptop. Forget about Windows on X86. It's garbage. You get terrible battery life. The fan always runs. The laptop's hot. The battery's a fire hazard. You know, like all the FUD that they can spew about criticizing X86 on mobile. Well, I think AMD is going to be the... What do I want to say to this? AMD is going to right the wrongs. Like, they're going to... Well, they didn't even do anything wrong, but they're going to basically prove that Snapdragon and Qualcomm, it's going to be a fight. They declared war at Computex. If they want a war, they're going to have to win the war. And it's going to be not only Intel. As everyone's like, oh, it's Intel. Intel's basically getting slapped silly by Qualcomm right now. Well, okay, we're going to see what happens when Team Orange shows up and teaches them a lesson. No. I never had problems with the RGB. It bricked your RGB bar? I have the Trick software on my computer here. I mean, I'm using the Nitro right now. The Nitro is the GPU in this PC. I mean, I left it on default. I did use the Sapphire Trick software to change it to white a couple times. Strix Halo for sure will knock some socks off. Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that you're having problems with that RGB bar, though. That sounds... Wow. Strix Point is just the start. Strix Point is just the start. Yeah, well, It's gonna be a long battle though, guys. Like the teams are already gonna be forming though. It's gonna be a war. It's basically gonna be AMD and Intel in this weird like pseudo truce where they kind of team up against Qualcomm to try to prevent them from achieving their goal of 50% market share in laptop in Windows in 5 years. Because that was a declaration of war. That was literally a declaration of war. When he said that ARM-based CPUs, ARM-based platforms in Windows, in the Windows mobile space will achieve 50% market share in 5 years. That's something that AMD themselves have never managed to do in the X86 world. So when Qualcomm is saying, hey, we're going to take 50% of your entire market in 5 years, that's straight up a declaration of war against Intel. But it affects AMD too. So AMD and Intel, they're going to have their own marketing against Qualcomm. So like I said, it's going to be a battle. Now the really, really scary thing though, here's where things get really, really interesting. A year from now, there will be another, potentially, this is all rumor, I don't know if this is true, but I have heard around the vineyard that a year from now, or maybe a little bit more than, maybe 18 months from now, there's going to be another player entering the mobile Windows space with an ARM-based product. And do you know who that company is? So basically, here's what's going to happen, guys. Here's what's going to happen. Qualcomm is basically Raditz from Dragon Ball Z, Season 1. AMD is Goku, because they're orange. Intel is Piccolo, because Piccolo teamed up with Goku to fight Raditz and save the world. In this case, it's the world of X86. So the two of them are going to be doing battle with Raditz, and they're probably going to kill him off a little bit. But you know who's going to come in a year from now, or a year and a half from now? You know who's going to fly in from outer space and crash down into X86 world? With their alien technology, their ARM technology, with their own ARM-based CPU for mobile. It's a green company. It's called NVIDIA. NVIDIA is going to enter the fray. And NVIDIA is going to team up with Qualcomm to defeat Intel and AMD. So it's going to be really, really crazy, guys. When that ARM CEO said we're going to take 50% market share of the mobile space in 5 years, it's not just Qualcomm. He's talking about ARM, the architecture, not just Qualcomm. Because he knows that there's other players. It's not just Qualcomm. NVIDIA is going to come in. And it's going to be like, oh boy, uh-oh. Because you know that they have a lot of ways of marketing things. Like they're already making fun of NPUs. They're basically saying NPUs are garbage. You can't do real AI on your rinky-dink NPU, regardless of whether it's x86 or ARM. You got to have RTX, man. RTX for AI. But I kid you not, as soon as NVIDIA enters the mobile space with their own ARM CPU, all the things that they say to put down NPUs and make them look like they're garbage, they're going to flip that narrative and they're going to say, hey, NPUs are great, man. Look at our NPU. It's so good. They're the best thing ever. They're going to change like that. They're going to change the game. They're going to change the narrative. The more you buy, the more you save. Well, they're not going to use that because they're talking about trying to sell a laptop. But yeah. NVIDIA versus Ultra Ethernet. Well, that's another battle that they created overnight with all their AI data center stuff. But yeah. They actually kind of lost that war, Sid. They actually lost. They gave it up. They gave up on that. The it's not NVLink. It's InfiniBand, not NVLink. The real battle is InfiniBand versus Ethernet. But yeah, the NVLink and the Ultra Ethernet are more like sub technologies within that overall ecosystem. They're gonna need to throw a lot of power into the chip to counter Windows. What you said's not wrong. It's just, it's like a smaller section of the overall war. It's like a naval battle. You're describing like a naval battle when there's also ground assaults that are happening. Yeah, they're gonna need to throw a lot of power into that chip to counter Windows' lackluster translation layer. Yeah, well, we'll see. I mean, we'll see we'll see how the Snapdragon does. Nvidia is basically letting Qualcomm be the beta tester for the market, essentially. Like, let Qualcomm go in, spend all the marketing dollars to get people to become aware of ARM in the laptop market, in the tablet market, and then if they're successful, well, regardless whether they're successful or not, NVIDIA doesn't really care. They're just going to use the learnings of what happens to launch better. They're going to take what Qualcomm did in terms of how they launch and position the product, and they're going to do it better. That's how they're going to do it. You got the virus, you want to build a PC? Well, you missed the entire discussion, unless you were here earlier. You missed the entire discussion about X870 and X870E. But yeah, man, Zen 5 X3D is probably going to be, like, super good. You know, the thing that I want to test, the only reason why, okay, not the only reason why, because I'm also interested in overclocking Zen 5, because it's so efficient, so why would you not overclock it? But the reason why, one of the first things I want to do when I get the Zen 5 CPU is play Dragon's Dogma. I want to play Dragon's Dogma 2. I want to benchmark Dragon's Dogma 2 with Zen 5, because I think Dragon's Dogma 2 is the new CPU benchmark of the year. Like, it is the new CPU benchmark. I don't care about all those synthetic benchmarks. I want to see how does a new CPU handle Dragon's Dogma 2, the most CPU-bound game of the year. If it's not game of the year, it's the most CPU-bound game of the year. It'll win that award for sure. Dragon's Dogma 2 already won that award, guaranteed. Most CPU-bound game of the year. 100%. You want me to test it with an Arc A770? Man, it doesn't even work right with the A770. Remember, we had all those invisible things that weren't rendering, those objects that would cause it to... That is an interesting test, though. Like, how much can the Zen 5 just brute force its way through the game and just drag the A770 along with it? Because the A770 is basically, like, pulling down the average so severely. Speaking of Arc A770, man, when is Battle Mage coming out? I think after Computex, everybody completely forgot about Intel's GPUs. Like, man, it's sad because you guys know where it's going to land, right? Remember what I said? Here it is. Remember what I said, about 60%, 65%. There you go. There's your Battle Mage. I've done the work for you. That's how fast Battle Mage is. It's as fast as the GPU that's on the screen right now. I am declaring this is the same speed. An RTX 4070 is exactly the same speed as Intel's new Battle Mage GPU. We don't even know where it is. We don't even know what the spec is, but we already know how fast it is. It's as fast, roughly as fast as an RTX 4070 or a previous generation AMD 6800 XT. I've done all the work for you. This is Battlemage. So if you have a GPU that is equivalent to this, Battlemage is not going to be an upgrade. It is going to be a side grade at best. So it's going to be, it'll also be similar to an RTX 3080. That's another one that's similar to the new Battlemage. Sadly, if it's not cheaper than a 7800 XT, it's dead on right. Yeah, it can't really be like more than like $450, like somewhere in there. I mean, it has some room because the this card is like what, 450? What is this card priced at? Like, roughly speaking, today, the 770. You know what's funny? We already know how fast, like, this year is so weird when it comes to graphics cards, because we already know how fast the newer cards are without even, like, knowing anything about the new cards. So, going back to this, let's use current generation hardware. So forget about 3080, it's too old. So this is Battlemage. But you know what this is? You guys know what's a new gaming device that's coming out this year that's as fast as this? You think you're giving your wife my second build and build a X870E 9900X3D? Yeah, that would be a balanced build. Yeah. 48 gigs of RAM for a 12 core. Yep, that's the way to go. Marcelo got it, man. PS5 Pro. This is it, guys. PS5 Pro. You're looking at how fast the PS5 Pro is. There you go. PS5 Pro, Intel Battlemage. Which means Intel Battlemage is not that much faster than a PS5 Pro. If you look at this, according to Tech PowerUp, now obviously don't always use Tech PowerUp, but Tech PowerUp says that a 4070 is like 13% faster than a 7700 XT. Which means Intel's Battlemage is going to be about 10% faster than a PS5 Pro. So all that waiting for an Intel GPU that's only 10% faster than PS5 Pro. So keep that in mind. That's roughly where they'll land. That's roughly how fast they'll be. And we haven't heard anything about Battlemage. We have heard like nothing about Arrow Lake. Intel hid the socket. And then when it comes to AMD, we have not heard anything about RDNA 4. So RDNA 4 is even weirder. Like, that's the one that's even more unknown. Like, there's all these rumors how people are saying that it'll be, it's not going to be like a true next gen. It's like a revision. It's going to probably have like dedicated RT cores and all this stuff. And they might have like Tensor Core hardware on there. So they're going to dedicate die space to those aspects of it, which means it's not going to be the same sort of uplift, which means it's probably only going to be like this, but it's going to be more energy efficient, but it's going to have better ray tracing. Like, those are what the rumors say when it comes to RDNA 4, in terms of the fastest RDNA 4. And we did do, in fact, I probably should upload the clip section from last week's live stream, or was it the previous week's live stream, where we talked about strategy for AMD, how they have, like, they have two teams internally that basically leapfrog. One did Vega, one did RDNA 1, the other did, you know what I mean? Like, they kind of do that. So the team that comes up with the more, like, different thing is the one that is not up to bat. There's the one that usually does the revised things that are usually better, well perceived by the public. For example, RDNA 2, and the Polaris GPUs, like the RX 480 and the RX 580. Like, those GPUs were actually very positively accepted by the industry, whereas other things that were more like far out of left field, like Vega with HBM2 and Radeon 7, they were kind of like gimmicky, or they weren't gimmicky, but they were just, they were expensive to manufacture, and it was hard to get volume, and like these weird things that's like experimental products that don't actually translate into lots of sales volume. Like that's the team that does the more interesting things, and they're the ones that put out RDNA 3, I would assume, because RDNA 3 has the chiplet based sections for the GPU, unlike RDNA 2, which was monolithic. So who knows what RDNA 4 is going to do? We know like nothing about it, but I would assume that it's probably going to be monolithic, or it's probably going to be done by the team that does the things that are more successful financially. So I call them the B team, if you guys remember from that live stream. So I think that's what RDNA 4 is going to be, but we have no idea on the time frame. And I would actually prefer if AMD, now they probably are going to put some kind of product out in Q4 at the very end of the year, like in December, for example. They're probably going to launch RDNA 4. I don't know where it'll land. All the rumors point to it being somewhere around a 7900 XT. Cost, who knows? Probably $700 to $800. Maybe even $850. Who knows at this point? The thing is, if it's as fast as this, and this is already discounted down to like 700, they'll probably launch it at like anywhere from $749 to $849. I don't think they're gonna do like $900 again though. Did I hear about Kingpin? No, I did not. I know who he is. He used to be at EVGA. Check your comment above. Where? Okay. Where's the comment about Kingpin? How far back was it? Oh. BIOS? Wait. Did you leave? I don't see the comment about Kingpin. Oh, PNY? I don't see any comment about Kingpin. Yeah, I don't see any comment about Kingpin. For some reason, I can't see the comment, though. Does anyone else see the comment about Kingpin? Besides the comment saying you hear about Kingpin? That's the only one. But yeah, he went to PNY. Yeah. No, I knew he went to PNY because I saw the Vertex. I saw a thumbnail from like a news article with him and like a Vertex, which is PNY's overclock model custom AIB card. EVGA is gone and not coming back. Gamers Nexus interviewed who? He interviewed EVGA's owner, or he interviewed Kingpin? If he interviewed Kingpin, whatever, man. Kingpin went to PNY, that's fine. But did he interview the EVGA guy? Because what is the strategy with EVGA? Are they just kind of like dead? Like what? Watch EVGA come back. Okay, watch what's gonna happen. I bet this is what's gonna happen. The owner retires. Somebody from his family line takes over, whether it's a son or a daughter or a niece or nephew or whatever. Somebody takes control of EVGA, or maybe he just like appoints someone that's on the vice president level. or the CTO or something. He makes somebody else the CEO of EVGA. And you know what that guy does? He starts selling Intel GPUs. He starts selling Battlemage. Watch EVGA come back with Battlemage GPUs. Watch them come back. I don't think they're going to come out with AMD GPUs. I don't expect AMD GPUs from EVGA anytime soon. They're going to come back as an Intel partner. If they come back to GPUs, they're going to become an Intel partner. They're going to start selling Intel GPUs. Oh, man. Yeah, because that's real profitable right there. Yeah, Intel GPUs. You're going to make a ton of money selling, hold up, where is it? A310. They're going to make a bunch of money selling this thing. An Intel Arc A310. 4 gigs of memory. It's funny because it's like all these big YouTube channels complain about 8 gigs is not enough. They're going to sell GPUs with 4 gigs of RAM, GDDR6 on a 64-bit bus with 16 ROPs. 768 cores. Check it out. You're looking at it. EVGA. Arc EVGA for the win edition. Faster than a GTX 950. Faster than an RX 560. You see that? It is about 8% faster than an RX 560. A GPU that came out in 2017. It beats a GPU from 2017, guys. A glorified AV1 accelerator. Oh, is that what EVGA is gonna do? They're gonna sell AV1 encoders. They're gonna buy up a bunch of A310s and market them as AV1 encoders. They aren't even gonna market them as GPUs. They're gonna try to sell them as an AV1 product, not as a GPU. They're gonna sell it as an AV1 product. Hey guys, come get our AV1 encoder. It's really good. It's so good that the die isn't even centered. You know that? It's like not even centered. It's like it's like to the southwest. Because it's cool like that. Wait, this thing's from 2022? I didn't even know it was that old. This is that old? That makes it even worse. Hey, it's about as fast as a GTX 660 and a GTX 1050 or a Radeon 7950 from 2011. That used to be AMD's fastest GPU. In fact, I remember this one. I'll never forget the 7950 because this was the recommended GPU for Final Fantasy XIV: A Realm Reborn when it first came out. Like, this was the recommended AMD GPU. I think the NVIDIA one was like a GTX 670 or something. Or 660 Ti. Or I think it was the GTX 670 was the recommended NVIDIA card. And the HD 7950 was the recommended AMD. The 1630 is faster than that? That's, yeah, 1630. Wait, 1630? Yeah, 1630 is about as fast as the 7950. Yeah. That's why bus widths are kind of funny, because it's like, this thing has a 384-bit bus, and it's as fast as a 1630. Now, granted, this thing came out in, like, November of 2011. Or, well, I guess January 2012. Yeah, because the flagship, the 7970, was November 2011. This is the second fast. This is the cut-down one. This one was January 2012. Yeah. Is that why they named the 24 XTX? Because they already had used 7950? Yeah, 7950 was, well, it's the HD 7950. See, it's HD. It's the Radeon High Definition 7950. So you know from the name that this is not a 4K graphics card. It's pretty clear that this is not meant for 4K gaming. Look at that awesome 3 gigs. 3 gigs of GDDR5. Not even GDDR6. GDDR5 on a 384-bit bus. That awesome 3 gigs. Oh, that is so much memory, man. That is so good for AI. 3 gigs. It would take this. It would probably take this thing 6 months to reply to basically reply to a chat GPT query. The Southern Islands. Man, look at the difference though. A 7900 XT. A 7900 XT is 838% faster than this card. That is what you call progress. This card looks like those 120 gig Microsoft 360 hard drive. Yeah, it does actually look like that. It does actually look like that. That is the most random thing I've heard all day. It looks like a 360 hard drive. With a fan on it, too. It's complete with a fan. I can see it, man. It does look like it. It doesn't have. It's not supposed to have the red like that, but yeah, it does look like it. Hold on, Xbox. Hold on. Do they have the Xbox 360? Whoa, they have all the Xbox 360 stuff in here. Yeah, it's the thing on the top. It's the top part of it. Man, that's cool that this website actually has all this. I like the tech power up. Oh, but it doesn't show you how it stacks up to the other GPUs. Oberon. There it is. I like how they title it. What? They need to fix this title, dude. Like, this is wrong. This is straight up wrong. AMD PlayStation 5 GPU. This should say Sony PlayStation 5 GPU. Since when is the PlayStation 5 called AMD PlayStation 5? This is straight up webmastering fail right here. That is completely mislabeled. I understand what they mean because AMD like did the design for the chip, but come on now. This is not an AMD, like it's not AMD PS5, people. Oberon. It's an Oberon. 2,304 cores, 256-bit bus, 16 gigs of GDDR6. Monolithic die. Right there on the top. Sony Interactive Entertainment. I still think, like, the PS5, it looks kind of like a home Wi-Fi router. It does look a lot like a router instead of an actual gaming console. But it is... I think it's one of the coolest looking consoles. It's a cool looking console. I like it. Unfortunately, they don't show... You'd have to look at the theoretical and then like kind of place where it falls in the hierarchy. But in general, this thing is about as fast as a... RX 6700 non-XT. This is the PS5. So notice that even though this is 256 and this is only 160, they perform almost the same. Now notice something. They both have the same number of cores, 2304. They both have the same number of TMUs, 144. They're both 64 ROPs. The only difference is this one, because it's basically an APU, it has the CPU section as well on this monolithic thing, and that's the reason why, because it's an SoC, it's a system on chip, which is the reason why it's got like the unified memory and all that stuff, and that because of all of that, it has a wider bus. They say AMD since AMD made the G. Well, it doesn't really matter. It belongs to Sony though. So that console players don't think they have an NVIDIA GPU in there. I don't think console players even know what, and I don't think console players would think that, to be honest. I don't think console players think of NVIDIA as having anything to do with console. In fact, you know what? I don't think console players who use a Nintendo Switch even know that NVIDIA is inside the Switch. Some of them do, but not. It's not typical. No, as far as I'm concerned, this should say Sony PlayStation 5, not AMD PlayStation 5. That's retarded. I mean, they can say right here, the PlayStation 5 GPU is a high-end gaming console graphics solution by AMD. Yeah, they can say that. But they shouldn't put the title AMD PlayStation 5 GPU. It just sounds so wrong. So what do they do to the Series X? Did they go and say AMD Xbox? What? This is actually interesting though, because this one, the Scarlet processor's got like way more cores, man. I didn't even notice that. That's a lot more. They got way more TMUs. But it only has 10 gigs of RAM. I thought they had the same amount of RAM as the PlayStation. 320. It's got a wider bus but less RAM. How does that work? How do you have less RAM and a wider bus? $52. Oh, versus what? 36? Is this 36 compute units? Yeah, 36 compute units. That's why. Interesting. Well, this is roughly the same as both the PS5 and the Series X. Technically, the Series X is more like a 6700 XT. But in the real world, it never really seems to perform significantly better than the PS5 for some weird reason. Oh, okay. That's interesting. Wait a minute. What is this? Is this a development board? Oh, this is the back? Wait a minute. They have like a place for a... Oh, that must be for the Wi-Fi card. I was gonna say that looks like a M.2 could go there. But that's the Wi-Fi. I wish they had pictures of the Sony one. The Sony circuit board. The only console that I've ever disassembled is the PlayStation 3 Fat. The original 60 gig PS3. The one that I used to have that died with the yellow light of death back in 2014. I'll never forget that. I tried to fix it with a hairdryer. It didn't work. I didn't have a heat gun, so I tried to put it in the oven for a while. It still didn't work. So that was the death of my PS5 that could play PS2 games natively. But I remember taking it apart. So it's always cool to look at these console boards. Man, these are so much smaller than the PS3 circuit board. Search for the Nintendo. Wait, hold on. Leave this one open. Nintendo Switch. Nothing found. Switch? Is this it? NVIDIA Switch GPU 20 nanometer. This thing is in such dire need of a newer console. Like, this thing is 2017. 4 gigs. Not even GDDR. It's DDR4. It's desktop. It's like CPU RAM for a gaming console. Now, granted, it's a handheld, but still, man. For real. Like, what is this? I'm surprised how much mileage the developers have been able to crank out of the Switch games, though. Because some Switch games look really good. Like the Zelda games, the Xenoblade Chronicles series looks good, but it looks awful when you're playing it in the undocked mode. It's equal to a GTX 750. Yeah, it's Maxwell. It's Maxwell based. Yeah, this is so old. Knowing Nintendo, because see, look, Nintendo always goes with the previous generation right as a newer generation's coming out. So, like, for example, the Switch came out in 2017. That was when the GTX 1080 Ti just launched. In fact, this was March. This console, where is the 1080 Ti? The 1080 Ti. The 1080 Ti, with its rather strange 352-bit bus. I always thought this was 384. I can't believe it's 352. That's odd. This launched March 10th, 2017 for $700. The Nintendo Switch launched March, so a few days later, after like Big Pascal comes to the gaming market, a Maxwell-based GTX 750 comes out as a Nintendo gaming console. You see what I'm saying? So Switch 2 is going to come out on RTX 30 series. Guaranteed. It's going to be RTX 30 series based technology, not 40 series. Do you think the Switch 2 will be as fast as a laptop 3050 or GTX 650? Well, if it's 1650, man, that's too old. That's like Turing. I don't think they'll go that old. I think it'll definitely be some kind of 30 series. Oh, an Ampere-based Orion. Yeah. That's actually what I think they're going to do. Because the... do they show... How do you spell it? The Orin? The Orin... Which one? Which one? They're all the same. Why are they like... Oh, they're different memory? The 16... Probably the 16 gig. Or do you think Nintendo is going to be cheap and go 8? I think they're going to go with this one. The Jetson Orin NX 16 gigabyte GA10B. 1024 cores, 16 gigs, 128-bit bus. Recommended gaming resolution 1900p. Not even recommended for 1080p. It's in the red for 1080p. Which means, basically, DLSS is going to be permanently on all the time for every single game on the Switch 2. Guaranteed. If they're going to try to target 1080p, they're going to take 720p or, well, probably 720p and upscale all the way to 1080p, or they're just going to upscale to 1900p on a Switch 2. The thing is docked mode. Docked mode on 1080p will require like a lot of upscaling. System RAM on Switch 2 does not equal VRAM on a GPU. Oh, that's right. Well, Do you think it's going to be like 16 gig total then? It will be an LPDDR5. Well, these are all LPDDR5. This one has 16. This has 8. I would think they would go with a 16. They have some larger ones though. Yeah, they got some larger ones. This one has a lot more. This one has 2048. 12 gig total. Oh. Well, then it's probably going to be... Well, it still would be one of these then, right? Either way, it's Nintendo. It's going to be a 720p console. It's going to be a 720p console that launches in 2025. Let's be honest. Leave it to Nintendo to launch a 720p console in the year 2025. When Sony and Microsoft have been targeting 4K and failing miserably for the last 4 years. Meanwhile, Nintendo launches a 720p console and relies on DLSS to literally upscale every single game all the way to 1080p. Look at the top one with 32. They're not going to put a 32 gigabyte part as a Switch 2, man. I can't see that happening. That's too much. That's like way too much memory. Nintendo is going to go lowest cost, cheapest option. Use software as much as possible to improve performance, dynamic resolution scaling, NVIDIA DLSS on everything. Turn up that DLSS to the max and make it so blurry that you can't see the flaws in the art. $1080p is what the Series X and PS5 should be targeting, to be honest. I honestly think 1440p, though. Those consoles, in my book, those consoles are 1440p. Because you look at the GPU, well... the GPU is roughly this. This is faster than a 1080 Ti. So the PS5 is kind of like this. I mean, technically it's like a little... You know, the 6700 is so similar to the 7600. They're almost exactly the same. You would barely be able to tell the difference between the two. So it's already as fast as a 20... What is this? Like 2080 Super somewhere in there? Yeah, so it's like 2080. PS5 and Xbox Series X are basically 2080. And I would consider that 1440p capable for a lot of like typical games. But now if you're talking like modern games, like Avatar and those type of games, then no. It's not strong enough to do that at 1440p. But no ray tracing with dynamic resolution scaling or with FSR, you could achieve 1440p. And upscaling, honestly, upscaling from 1080 native to 1440p is not that bad. Now, if you're going to upscale to 4K, that is where all the problems happen. And that is why PS5 and Xbox games look so bad. Don Peters with that sub. Thanks for the sub, man. I appreciate it. So, yeah, like... You think 700 GRE is a modern day 1440p? Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, I would agree with that. Because something like this would still have to rely on upscaling for a lot of modern games. But see, that's where this comes in. Where is it? Check this out. The 7700 XT is about 40% faster than a 7600. So from this to a 7700 XT, that's a 40% gap in favor of the 7700 XT. And there you go. That's your PS5 Pro spec. So the PS5 Pro with this sort of spec will be much better at running 1440p native in a lot of games. No RT, so you don't have to deal with any of that. And maybe FSR for some of the newer games, especially UE5 based games like Lords of the Fallen, for example. That's a game that runs really bad on PS5. That's a UE5 game. That's the only UE5 game that I've seen that I've actually played on the PS5. And at launch it ran like trash, but supposedly the developers have improved the performance tremendously. But I haven't tested it in a while. 4K is not happening on consoles until PS6. Yeah, seriously, like the PS5 and Xbox are never going to be 4K. They're never going to be real 4K. Ever. Like, ever. Regardless of what they market them as. Sony took the 8K badge off of the PS5 box. They got rid of the 8K branding because it was like, why? The thing is even 4K and you're trying to say it's 8K? Like, yeah, no. No, 4K is reserved for only like the top GPU at this point. Really, in my mind, there's only like one real 4K GPU today, and that would be the RTX 4090. Now, it depends on who you ask. Some people will say, no, you can make do with a 7900 XT. That's good enough for 4K. Everything else is overkill. Okay, let me say something about 4K. Because I actually game at 4K. Native. None of this DLSS, none of this FSR. I game at 4K native, as you guys know. Anyone who's saying that a 7900 XT or a 3090 Ti are 4K, like they're true 4K GPUs, no, they're not 4K GPUs. They can game at 4K, but with a lot of compromise. You got to turn down presets if you want to have high FPS. Now, if you only care about 60 FPS, or if your game only runs at 60 FPS, or if your game isn't even that new, then yeah, then you could say that a 7900 XT is all you need for 4K. In fact, if you go further back, a GRE is enough for 4K. Even the 7800 XT can game at 4K. I mean, I've done that. When I did the review for the 7800 XT last year, I tested it at 4K. We did a live stream gaming on 4K native, and you can game on a $500 GPU at 4K. Now, if you're going to play super demanding games like Avatar, Cyberpunk, even Hogwarts Legacy and some of these other ones, not at 4K native. It ain't happening. So, 700 XTX can also do native 4K. Yeah, 700 XTX is really good. But remember, I'm not talking about the XTX. We're not talking about XTX. We're talking about XT and GRE, and the other ones that fall into this category, like 3090 Ti, 4070 Ti Super Duper. Like, these cards can technically game at 4K, but sometimes, depending on the game, there's going to be compromise. Have you tried 1800p gaming? Some people say that's a better balance than 2160p. I don't like 1800p because I don't like running my monitor at the non-native resolution. So for something like that, I would turn on upscaling and I would set the preset to the, what do they call it? Not quality. It's like ultra quality. I think ultra quality preset in some games, or if they have the percentage slider, like how Starfield has the slider for the upscaler, then I would do 1800p. But no monitor does 1800p natively, as far as I know. No modern monitor does 1800p natively. And I don't like running my monitor at non-native resolution, because of the way DPI scaling doesn't really look good. But yeah. Funny that you mentioned 1800p. 1800p is an internal resolution that a lot of consoles render when you're using the quality preset on the console, like on a PS5 or an Xbox. 1800p it's like a target resolution the dynamic scaler tries to reach if it's not going to go to 4K. So, but yeah, 1800p is an interesting resolution that no one ever really talks about. It always comes up when you're evaluating dynamic resolution, though. That's where I hear a lot about 1800p. There was another article. I think there was someone was saying where MSI did something. Like MSI, was it MSI? Ryzen API, da 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 da. Lunar Lake, this, that, Strix. Yeah, we'll talk more about these probably later in July when Strix comes out. We're going to revisit mobile again. Intel Core Ultra Lunar reportedly hits 4,100 time spy. Okay. Reportedly considering higher TDP for Ryzen. Okay. Intel Core Ultra, AMD to present neural. Yeah, all this means, this is an interesting one. I saw this one pop up just now. This would, oh, interesting. Higher TDP. Well, we already knew this, guys. Like, this is an interesting one. This one just popped in. AMD is now considering changes to the 9000 SKU. The company is informing its board partners that the 8-core may require more power than initially announced. However, given the... I wonder if what this means is they're basically going to do a... what do you call it? PBO preset. So you'll have like the 120 watt mode and the 65 watt mode. I think that's probably what this is. But that's interesting. So basically what it's saying that if you can run it at a higher TDP, it will outperform a 7800X3D in gaming. I assume it means gaming because it already beats the 7800X3D in productivity. I mean, regular Zen 4 beats Zen 4 X3D in productivity. So we already knew that. But the thing is, higher TDP basically means it's faster. That's interesting. That's very interesting. No, although, realistically, what I planned on doing, this is kind of spoilers for what I planned on doing, is I was just going to overclock it anyway, which means I was going to automatically raise the power limit and see what it does to see how it scales with more power. So if they're going to have the preset built into the BIOS, then that's cool because that eliminates a lot of the manual overclocking work, or at least simplifies it somewhat. But that's very interesting that they could do a higher TDP setting or preset in the BIOS so that it could beat a 7800X3D. So, okay. Interesting. Yeah, I can probably join. So here's the thing. I don't know what I'm going to do. So we're going to switch focus here. Dawn Trail Early Access is going to happen in how many hours? 4 hours? 5 hours? 4.5 hours? 4.5 hours from now, I will be waking up to play Final Fantasy XIV. And it's going to be really weird. I don't know if I'm going to live stream that because it's going to be super early in the morning for a lot of people. Most people are probably going to be asleep unless you literally live on the other side of the world. So I don't know if I'm going to live stream super early Friday morning. And when I say super early, I'm talking like 5 a.m. in the morning Eastern time. So that's like very, very early in the morning for a lot of people. But I was going to go to sleep, actually. I didn't expect this stream to go on this long. I wasn't planning on talking for more than like 2 hours, but the stream went on. We're now almost 3.5 hours. I was supposed to go to sleep because I was going to get up early to play Final Fantasy XIV Dawn Trail Early Access and probably live stream that. So I don't know if I'm going to go in the Discord for a very long amount of time, but I can probably stop there for a short while. DLSS and FSR quality is basically upscaling. Yeah, so this makes sense. I mean, this is not really that surprising. If they want to include a 120 watt mode, that's an easy toggle. It eliminates a lot of manual overclocking stuff, but I still think it'll be fun to try to overclock this, because the lower TDP typically means you have better headroom when overclocking. So, but that wasn't what I was looking for. There was something that now I forgot what it was. Oh well. That's probably going to be it, guys, for this episode of Tech Thursdays. Oh, it was some article. I remember now. There was some article about MSI regarding the BIOS updates for Zen 5. Project Kush with the sub. Thanks for the sub. Appreciate it. Man, we actually had a couple of people sub during this live stream. I don't normally get a lot of people that subscribe while I'm live. So I appreciate that. I think we got like 3 or 4 since the start. So anyway, guys, that's going to be it. I don't know. So here's the schedule for me. I'm going to be playing a lot of Final Fantasy. So for those wondering, I did complete Elden Ring, Shadow of the Erdtree. I killed the final boss in a very stupid way. Basically, all I did was play as King Leonidas, hold a shield up, and poke him to death over and over again, just like in the movie 300. You basically hold up the shield and poke, 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 dodge, poke, regain stamina, poke, 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 until the final boss of the game died. Very lame and boring, and it made me realize that the final boss of Elden Ring's DLC is overtuned like crazy. So if you try to fight him conventionally, like dodge rolling and all this stuff, it would take me probably like 6 hours to learn the fight. And I was like, I ain't got time for that. I gotta finish this DLC before Final Fantasy expansion comes out, because that is going to basically replace Elden Ring at this point. So you're not going to see a lot of Elden Ring from me since I completed it now. So we're kind of done with Elden Ring. That was a good diversion while waiting for Dawn Trail. So the whole shift in focus is going to be now on Final Fantasy XIV again for the foreseeable future. We're probably going to be just doing Final Fantasy XIV content until the 2nd or 3rd week of July, which means that there will be a lot of me live streaming Final Fantasy XIV on the channel. So if you guys don't like that content, like if you don't care about Final Fantasy XIV, I'm not asking you guys to watch, but if you want to stop by and discuss like tech related things while I'm randomly grinding levels from like 80 to 90 in Boja Southern Front, for example, or whatever, I mean, feel free to do that, because I'm going to tell you guys, that is going to be an extremely boring grind that is mind-numbingly terrible, and we're starting that at like Friday morning, real early. I'm going to try to get through that grind as fast as possible, so I want to devote like 5 to maybe 8 hours total doing that, and then I'll probably do something else. But that's the plan. The plan is to play as a Viper and power level the Viper from level 80, which is a starting level, all the way to 90. And then once I hit level 90, then I can then experience the expansion. So that first 10 levels is basically me learning how to play the job. Learning the job on the job training. So that's what we'll do. Did you manage to fix the 4080S PC issues? I think I did. The only thing I did was reboot the PC, and then nothing. I updated OBS. OBS on that PC was very outdated, so I did. In fact, the version on there now is newer than the one that I'm using right on this PC. So I don't know if that fixed the problem, but I'm hoping that rebooting the PC and updating OBS may have fixed the problem. That being said, I don't think I'm going to be streaming on that PC. I don't trust it because I haven't been able to test Final Fantasy, because Final Fantasy, the servers have been down since Wednesday morning. So, meaning there was no way for me to log in and test the game until early access starts. So, and I'm not going to risk it with the 4080 super duper computer having weird issues while trying to get in through the queue line. So no. So I will either be live streaming on this machine that we're on right now, which has a Nitro Sapphire 7900 XTX, or I will be on Threadripper with an RTX 4090 and a Radeon W7500 Pro as the AV1 encoder. So we'll be doing that. So that being said, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. I'll probably stop in, swing by the Discord here shortly for a little bit, but I want to try to get some sleep before early access. So if you guys are, you know, if you're going to stop by tomorrow, I will probably be streaming the entire day tomorrow, Final Fantasy XIV. So until then, I will catch you guys next time on Tech Thursdays next week. Till then, take care. See you guys.